When I told my mother-in-law I was going back to my hometown to have my baby, she replied, "Go ahead. I don't want to see you." I felt relieved because I had been waiting for her to say that. I thought to myself, finally, I won't have to deal with her anymore. My name is Emily, and I'm almost 28 years old. My mom passed away when I was very young, so my grandmother took care of me while my dad ran his clothing business. My dad was strict, and I always did what he said. I never dated anyone because of his rules, but I had accepted that as my fate. After college, I briefly worked for my dad, but he said it was too hard to work together, so I had to quit. He didn't want me to work elsewhere either, but seeing my friends get jobs and start families made me want to work too. One night, I asked my dad if I could get a job. He simply said no without explaining why. I tried to reason with him, saying I needed to gain experience in society. But he shut me down. He insisted I stay at home. Frustrated, I threatened to leave home and find work elsewhere. My dad didn't like that and told me to stop talking back. Feeling upset, I stormed out and cried in my room for a long time. Eventually, I called my college friend Lisa and asked if I could stay at her place for a while. Lisa, who lived in a luxurious condo her parents gave her, agreed, sensing something was wrong. I quietly packed my suitcase and left home, hoping not to disturb my dad. I wrote a note explaining that I was staying with a friend and left it on my desk. Then, I took a taxi to Lisa's apartment. When I arrived, she welcomed me with my favorite coffee. I thanked her and poured out everything about the argument with my dad and why I left home. Lisa sympathized, saying I deserved freedom. It hit me hard that I had always followed my dad's orders without question, but now I longed for my own independence. Lisa agreed, saying it was normal to want to meet new people and have fun. She asked if my dad knew I was there, and I told her I left a note, but he didn't know any of my friends. Lisa suggested we go to bed since it was late, and she had prepared a separate room for me to sleep in. The next day, Lisa went to work, and when I checked my phone, I saw several missed calls from my dad. Feeling bad for worrying him, I sent him an email to reassure him that I was okay. Later in the evening, after Lisa finished work, she invited me to join her for a drink. Excited but inexperienced with socializing over drinks, I agreed to go out. When I got to the meeting place, I found Lisa waiting with two men. She introduced them, pointing to her boyfriend first, then to the single man, Max. With a warm smile, Max introduced himself, and our relationship began. Max worked at a small company in the clothing industry. At first, I wondered if Max's company was similar to my father's, but I quickly pushed the thought aside. Max's family situation was different from mine. He only had his mother around, but he didn't elaborate, and I didn't pry. One day, Max expressed his desire to meet my father, but I wasn't ready to go back home yet, despite exchanging emails with my dad. Instead, I suggested meeting Max's mom. He eagerly agreed, even suggesting we could visit her that very day. Wanting to bring a gift, I stopped by a bakery for a cake, knowing Max's mom appreciated such gestures. As it turned out, my mother-in-law not only appreciated gifts, but also became irritable if not presented with one. When we arrived at Max's house, his mother greeted us at the door, having received a message from him. She immediately questioned me about my life, expressing skepticism about my employment status and implying I lived a privileged life. I explained about my deceased mother and my father's job, but she dismissed my responses. Max, sensing the tension, urged us inside, asking if I had brought anything. Feeling rushed, I handed over the cake, apologizing for its simplicity. My mother-in-law snatched it from me, making a sarcastic remark before accepting it. In just a few minutes, I grew to dislike her, feeling sorry for anyone who had to deal with her as a mother-in-law. As soon as we stepped into the living room, my mother-in-law bombarded me with questions to which I responded with vague answers. However, she persisted, firing questions at me as if I were a suspect in an interrogation room. Feeling overwhelmed by the relentless questioning, I whispered to Max that I should probably leave soon. This seemed to infuriate my mother-in-law, her face flushing with anger. She accused me of hating her and giving insincere responses. Max tried to calm her down, but she lashed out, questioning his choice in bringing such a supposedly rude woman home. Annoyed, I defended myself, asking for specific feedback if there was something I could improve. This only seemed to aggravate her more, as she accused me of being cheeky and disliking her. I wanted to agree, but I just couldn't. I'm exhausted and longing to go home, I explained. My mother-in-law's response caught me off guard. How audacious of you. I wonder what kind of upbringing your parents gave you. They must have been lacking. Her words stung, and tears welled up in my eyes. Now you're crying for sympathy. If you want to leave so badly, go ahead. It might do you good. Oh, and by the way, I'll give this cake you brought to my dog Charlie, but he's quite picky, so he might not eat such a cheap cake. She pointed at the cake I had brought. Max intervened, telling his mother to stop. You really don't know how to judge people, he scolded her. Max's remark seemed to deflate his mother's argumentative energy. All I want is the best for you, Max, she countered, her tone softer. Max stood his ground, asserting his adulthood and his ability to handle his own affairs. His words brought tears to his mother's eyes, and she left the room, visibly upset. Feeling hurt by the harsh words of Max's mother, I decided to leave. However, Max caught up with me and apologized sincerely. Emily, I'm sorry for my mom's behavior. She might be feeling threatened, thinking she's losing me. I'll talk to her about it, okay? Please don't let this incident discourage you from visiting again. His words reassured me, but I couldn't shake off the hurt caused by his mother's comments about my parents. Max, what your mother said about my parents really hurt me. I don't think I want to see her again. As the sadness washed over me, tears welled up, and I found solace in Max's comforting embrace. After a while, he suggested we go somewhere, and we ended up at the beach, sitting on a sandy bench, watching the waves for hours. 2 months later, I discovered I was pregnant. When I shared the news with Max, he proposed marriage. Let's make it official. We don't need a grand ceremony, but we can live together in my house. I don't earn much, so renting an apartment isn't feasible. I'll talk to my mom about being more considerate towards you, Emily. Despite my reservations about living with his mother, I agreed, realizing it was our only option. Okay, I'll do my best to get along with your mother. And so, I found myself living with my mother-in-law after getting married. I returned home to inform my father about the decision. His face lit up with joy when he spotted me. It's wonderful to see you looking so well. We've been in touch, but it feels like ages since our last meeting. My father greeted me warmly. I'm sorry, Dad. I have something important to discuss with you, I replied, sensing his anticipation shift to curiosity. I proceeded to share the news of meeting Max, my pregnancy, and our plan to marry. My father listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he offered a simple, "Well, congratulations. I can't wait to meet my grandchild," though his smile seemed strained. "Thank you, Dad. I'm sorry for causing you any pain," I apologized, tears streaming down my cheeks. To my surprise, my father's eyes glistened with tears too. Instead of anger, his tender response hurt me more deeply. Eventually, I moved into my mother-in-law's home. Lisa, who had been a pillar of support since I left home, expressed her excitement about meeting my baby and shared her own hopes for marriage. Despite the mixed emotions, we made plans to dine together. Originally scheduled for Sunday, my mother-in-law insisted on moving the date to Saturday, citing superstitions. The move went smoothly, with the movers diligently transferring my belongings while my mother-in-law observed silently. Despite repeated warnings from the movers about the danger, my mother-in-law refused to step back. Once the move was completed, she called me over and questioned if I had given the movers their due payment. Confused, I asked, "Huh?" Sensing my confusion, she assumed I was feigning ignorance and left to rectify what she thought was a mistake. When she returned, she handed an exorbitant sum to the movers' leaders, assuming I hadn't provided enough. Stunned by the amount, I questioned her decision. "You gave them that much?" I exclaimed. She brushed it off. claiming it was for the best and citing superstition about avoiding curses by being generous. Knowing it would only lead to another argument, I remained silent, unwilling to engage further. My mother-in-law wore a smug expression, convinced of her righteousness. Just then, Max arrived and noticed the tension. He intervened, asking his mother what had happened. With a dismissive reply, she walked away. Max reassured me, expressing his disapproval of his mother's behavior. Grateful for his support, I decided not to mention the incident to avoid further conflict with my mother-in-law, knowing it would only worsen our relationship. After settling in, my mother-in-law noticeably avoided speaking to me, leaving me in peaceful silence for weeks at a time. One day, Max brought home some work documents in an envelope marked with the name Star Textiles Incorporated, causing me to gasp. This was a familiar name from my time working at my father's company. They were one of our subcontractors. Curious, I asked Max about the envelope's origin. "Is this from your company?" I inquired innocently. "Yes. Why do you ask?" he responded. Sensing it was best not to mention the connection between his company and my father's, I simply replied, "I was just curious. I realized I don't know much about your company." Max explained, "We're just a small subcontractor. If our parent company were to drop us, we'd go bankrupt instantly, and all the employees would lose their jobs." Max chuckled softly, a hint of nostalgia in his expression. Around a month later, I noticed a change in Max's routine. He started returning home from work later than usual and seemed visibly upset. Concerned, I asked him what was wrong. "You've been coming home late lately. Is everything okay?" "You seem different," I inquired. Max confessed, "The company is facing some challenges." "What kind of challenges?" I probed further. Max sighed. "The parent company unexpectedly slashed our orders by half. Our boss is desperately trying to convince them to maintain our business relationship. And we're also searching for new clients. But if things don't improve, we might go bankrupt." As I listened to Max's worries, I considered asking my dad for help. However, I knew my father's strict principles wouldn't allow him to assist a business partner based on personal feelings alone. It seemed like many of the company's partners were facing similar hardships. I disclosed to Max that my father's company was the parent company of his. Initially surprised, Max pleaded with me earnestly, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Emily, please implore your father not to cut ties with us," he urged. Regretfully, I explained, "Max, my father is firm when it comes to business. Personal matters wouldn't influence his decisions." Desperate, Max persisted. "Could you at least try?" Reluctantly, I agreed, knowing it likely wouldn't sway my father. Yet Max knelt before me, tears in his eyes, begging for help. "Please, I beg you," he pleaded. Frustrated, I implored him to stop, but I promised to speak to my father nonetheless. As Max lifted his head, tears of relief streamed down his face. That night, I called my father and relayed Max's plea. Surprisingly, my father agreed to help. "So, Max works for Star Textiles Incorporated? Then I must assist them," he stated. I was taken aback, expecting him to decline outright due to his strict business principles. However, he outlined two conditions. First, he would continue business with Star Textiles but wanted Max to join his company. Second, he requested that both Max and I move in with him. Puzzled, I questioned his motives for wanting us to live with him. Uncomfortably, my father admitted, "I just want my daughter close by." I accepted his conditions but sought clarification on why he had decided to reduce dealings with Star Textiles initially. He explained that a new company had offered an enticing proposal, prompting the shift in partnerships. Upon conducting some research, we discovered that the new company my father intended to partner with had a history of unfulfilled promises, prompting us to reconsider the deal. So, Star Textiles would have been fine even if I hadn't intervened? I asked, amused by the irony. "Maybe," my father chuckled, and I couldn't help but laugh along. After hanging up, I promptly informed Max of my father's conditions. He sighed with relief at the news that Star Textiles was no longer at risk, but expressed hesitance about joining my father's company. It's difficult for me to leave Star Textiles, Emily. I've built strong bonds there, and am unsure about starting anew, he admitted. Respecting his decision, I relayed his sentiments to my father, who acknowledged Max's dedication and allowed him to remain at Star Textiles. However, he remained firm about us moving in with him. Delighted by my father's decision, I cautioned Max not to disclose my father's involvement to his mother, knowing she would disapprove. He agreed, understanding the importance of keeping it a secret. Weeks later, as the time for our child's birth approached, I made the decision to return home. Despite having only my father and grandmother there, it felt preferable to staying with my mother-in-law. Waiting for the opportune moment when my mother-in-law was occupied with her afternoon tea, I approached her to break the news. Mother-in-law, regarding my childbirth, I've chosen to go back home. It's just my dad and my active grandmother there, I explained calmly. Her response was as expected, filled with disdain and resentment. By all means, go back. I don't want to see your face, she spat out. Unfazed by her reaction, I assured her, you won't have to see me anymore. Max will soon be moving in with my parents as well. Her confusion was palpable as she questioned my decision. Max is too busy with work to move, I reassured my mother-in-law, trying to ease any tension. Just then, Max entered and excitedly informed his mother, Mom, everything is going to be fine with the company now. Emily helped me out. Confused, she asked, What are you talking about? Max explained, Emily's dad is the owner of the parent company of the company I work for. Shocked, my mother-in-law's demeanor changed as she turned her attention to me. Emily, I had no idea you were connected to Max's company in that way. I've been terribly rude to you, she admitted, bowing deeply. It's all right now, I replied, trying to diffuse the tension. However, she surprised us all by requesting to live with my parents as well. Both Max and I declined, preferring not to dwell on the past hurtful interactions. I don't want to live with you, mother-in-law. Being here would only remind me of everything that's happened, I explained gently. Her tears flowing, she pleaded desperately, but we stood firm in our decision. Months later, we decided to visit my mother-in-law's house, only to find it empty and eerily quiet. Concerned, Max called out for his mother, receiving no response. As we searched the house, we found her emaciated and frail, lost in her own world. Despite our attempts to engage her, she remained silent, focusing only on the cake we had brought. As she devoured it hungrily, I couldn't help but think, well, mother-in-law, you brought this on yourself.
What a joke! Derek's mocking voice echoed through the hallway, shattering my world into pieces. You really think that raggedy upcycled garbage is going to sell? Wake up, sis. Raylan's living in a fantasy land. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears as I listened to my husband's scathing words, each one driving a fresh dagger into my soul. This wasn't some stranger criticizing my life's work. This was the man I'd loved and trusted, the father of my child. Harper's giggle cut through the stillness like a knife. Mom's so delusional. She honestly believes people will pay top dollar for old rags sewn together. Tears stung my eyes as the weight of their betrayal crashed down upon me. How could they be so cruel, so dismissive of the passion that fueled every stitch, every design born from repurposed materials? My dream wasn't just some whimsical flight of fancy. It was a commitment to sustainability, to breathing new life into the discarded. As their laughter subsided, I slipped away, my mind racing with a torrent of emotions, hurt, anger, determination. For too long, I'd turned a blind eye to Derek's subtle jabs and Harper's growing resentment. But this was a line crossed, a violation of trust that could never be undone. Later that night, as Derek snored beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing within, I made a decision. No more playing the victim. No more allowing them to trample my dreams underfoot. If they wanted to see me as a joke, I'd give them a punchline they'd never forget. The next morning, I called my best friend, Elise, a former lawyer with a razor-sharp mind. She was the only person I could trust with the truth, and the only one who could help me fight back. Elise, I need your help, I whispered, glancing over my shoulder to ensure Derek hadn't overheard. Things with Derek, they're not what they seem. Her voice was a lifeline, a beacon of clarity in the chaos. Tell me everything. And so I did, laying bare the years of emotional neglect, the financial misdeeds I'd uncovered, and the gut-wrenching betrayal that had shattered my world. With each word, I felt a weight lifting, replaced by a steely resolve to take back control of my life and my business. "We'll make him pay," Elise vowed, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Every penny he stole, every insult he hurled, he'll answer for it all. Starting today, we document everything." As I hung up the phone, a newfound sense of purpose coursed through my veins. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but I was done being the punchline. It was time to rewrite the joke, and this time, I'd be the one delivering the cutting final line. Elise didn't waste any time. Within days, she'd formulated a meticulous plan to expose Derek's misdeeds and secure my financial future. "First things first," she said during one of our clandestine meetings at a quiet cafe. "We need to document every single transaction he's made using your business accounts." I nodded, pulling out a thick manila envelope stuffed with bank statements and financial records. "I've been gathering evidence for months. Look at these numbers. He's been siphoning funds into his personal accounts, leaving me with just enough to keep the business afloat." Elise's brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. "That snake, he's been embezzling from you this whole time." "It gets worse." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the next revelation. "I overheard him on the phone with his banker last week. He's been lying about our profits, cooking the books to make it look like we're barely scraping by, so he can claim you're a financial burden and gain leverage in the divorce proceedings," Elise concluded, her jaw clenched tight. "Despicable." Our conversation was interrupted by the shrill ringing of my phone. Derek's name flashed across the screen, and I felt a surge of revulsion. Without hesitation, I declined the call and muted the ringer. Elise's eyes narrowed. What did that weasel want? Probably checking up on me, making sure his little cash cow is still producing. I spat the words like venom, years of pent-up resentment bubbling to the surface. Sliding a worn voice recorder across the table, Elise fixed me with a determined stare. "Start wearing this at all times. We need to catch him in the act, get him on record spewing his vitriol." The weight of the device in my palm felt heavy, a tangible reminder of the war I was waging. But I was done being a victim. It was time to fight back. That night, as Derek and I sat down for dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harper picked at her food, her gaze flickering between us like a spectator at a boxing match. "What's gotten into you lately?" Derek sneered, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "You've been acting awfully strange." I took a deep breath, pressing the record button beneath the table. "Just focused on the business, that's all." "Just," he scoffed, stabbing at his steak with more force than necessary. "That little hobby of yours? Don't kid yourself, Ray. It's never going to amount to anything more than a drain on our finances." Harper's eyes widened, but she remained silent, no doubt fearing the wrath of her father's sharp tongue. "You know, Derek," I replied, keeping my voice measured and even, "for someone who claims to support my dreams, you sure have a funny way of showing it." His fork clattered against the plate as his fist slammed down on the table. "Support your dreams? Don't make me laugh. Every penny I've wasted on that ridiculous project is a penny too many." The words stung, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I met his venomous glare with a steely gaze of my own. "Well then, it's a good thing you won't have to waste any more of your precious money on me." Rising from the table, I fixed him with a cold smile. "I'll be sure to pack my bags tonight." As I left the room, Derek's sputtering protests fell on deaf ears. The war had begun, and I had no intention of losing. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. Derek prowled the halls like a caged animal, his footsteps heavy with barely contained rage. Whenever our paths crossed, his eyes bored into me, searching for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolute facade. But I refused to break. With each snide remark, each thinly veiled insult, I stood my ground, meeting his vitriol with stony silence. The recorder in my pocket became a talisman of sorts, a constant reminder of the evidence I was against him. Harper, caught in the crossfire, retreated into herself. Gone was the carefree teenager who once laughed and joked with her father. In her place was a hollow-eyed shadow, flinching at raised voices and avoiding us both whenever possible. It was during one of these encounters that the dam finally burst. "What's wrong, princess?" Derek sneered as Harper scurried past, her gaze fixated on the floor. "Cat got your tongue?" She froze, her shoulders tensing, and for a moment I thought she might flee. But then, slowly, she turned to face him, and the look in her eyes sent a chill down my spine. "Just leave me alone," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek threw back his head and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that set my teeth on edge. "What's the matter, Daddy's little girl too good to talk to her old man now?" "Derek, that's enough." I stepped forward, placing a hand on Harper's trembling shoulder. She said, "Leave her alone." His gaze snapped to mine, eyes glittering with malice. "Stay out of this, Raylan. This is between me and my daughter." "Your daughter?" I echoed, my grip tightening on Harper's shoulder. "Since when do you give a damn about being a father? All you care about is yourself and your precious money." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. For a heartbeat, Derek was speechless, his face contorting with rage. Then, like a coiled serpent, he struck. "How dare you?" he snarled, taking a step forward. "After everything I've done for this family, for your pathetic little hobby, and this is the thanks I get?" Harper flinched, shrinking back against me, but I stood my ground. Reaching into my pocket, I thumbed the record button, capturing every venomous word. "You've done nothing but belittle me, Derek, lie to me, steal from me. You're a despicable excuse for a husband and a father." His face turned an ugly shade of purple, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. But then, as quickly as it had come, the storm passed, and he deflated like a punctured balloon. "You'll regret this," he hissed, jabbing a finger in my face. "Mark my words, Raylan, I'll make sure you lose everything." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving Harper and me alone in the oppressive silence. "Mom?" Her voice was small, tremulous. "What's going on?" Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, I pulled her close, grateful for the solid weight of her against my side. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," I murmured, more for my own benefit than hers. "Everything's going to be just fine." But as I gazed down the hall where Derek had disappeared, a tendril of doubt wormed its way into my heart. Had I underestimated his capacity for cruelty? His willingness to drag us all down in his quest for vengeance? Only time would tell. And in the meantime, I would keep fighting. Keep gathering ammunition for the battle to come. Because one thing was certain. I would never let that man break me again. The day had finally come. With Elise's guidance, I'd compiled an ironclad case against Derek, complete with financial records, audio recordings, and a mountain of damning evidence. There would be no more running, no more hiding. It was time to rip off the mask and expose him for the monster he truly was. "Are you sure about this?" Elise's voice was gentle but laced with steel as we went over the plan one final time. "Once you confront him, there's no going back." I took a deep, steadying breath, my fingers tightening around the thick manila envelope containing the fruits of our labor. "I'm sure. He needs to answer for what he's done." A soft knock at the door shattered the tense silence. "Mom? Elise? It's me, Harper." My heart clenched at the weariness in her voice, a painful reminder of the toll this war had taken on her young spirit. Elise shot me a questioning look, and I nodded, bracing myself for the inevitable explosion. "Come in, sweetie." The door creaked open, and Harper slipped inside, her eyes wide and haunted. "Dad's home," she whispered, wringing her hands. "He's in the living room, waiting for you." My mouth went dry, but I refused to let my nerves show. Squaring my shoulders, I turned to Elise. "It's time." She squeezed my arm, offering a grim smile. "I've got your back, let's do this." With Harper trailing behind, we made our way to the living room, each footstep echoing like a death knell. Derek looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Elise. "What's going on here?" he demanded, rising to his feet. "What's she doing in my house?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Elise beat me to it. "Sit down, Derek," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We need to have a little chat." He bristled, his jaw clenching. "I don't take orders from—" "Sit down." Elise's tone brooked no argument, and after a tense moment, Derek lowered himself back onto the couch, his eyes smoldering with barely concealed rage. Sliding the envelope onto the coffee table, I fixed him with an icy glare. "These are detailed financial records, documenting every single penny you've embezzled from my business over the past 5 years. His eyes widened, but he quickly regained his composure, scoffing dismissively. You're delusional. I've done nothing but support your little hobby. Save it. I jabbed a finger at the envelope. The evidence is right there, plain as day. Bank statements, wire transfers, everything. Derek opened his mouth, no doubt to spew forth another round of lies and denials, but I cut him off. That's not all. Pulling out my phone, I queued up the first in a long line of audio recordings. I have hours of footage documenting your emotional abuse, your constant belittling and degradation. As his own voice filled the room, hurling insults and venom with chilling casualness, Derek's face drained of color. Harper gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she listened to her father's hateful words. No. Derek's voice was little more than a hoarse croak. You can't. That's not. It's over, Derek. Elise's voice was cold, utterly devoid of mercy. We have more than enough evidence to bury you in court. You're going to jail, and Raylan is taking everything, the house, the business, full custody of Harper. You've lost. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the sound of Derek's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, he turned to face me, and the look in his eyes sent ice flooding through my veins. You'll regret this, he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. I swear to God, Raylan, I'll make you suffer for this. You and that little brat will wish you'd never been born. Before I could respond, Harper was there, stepping between us with her shoulders thrown back and her chin raised in defiant challenge. That's enough out of you, she spat, her voice trembling but unwavering. You're the one who's going to suffer, you pathetic excuse for a father, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Pride swelled in my chest as I watched my daughter stand tall against the man who'd tormented us for so long. In that moment, I knew we would be okay. We would survive this nightmare, and maybe, just maybe, we'd emerge stronger than ever before. Derek opened his mouth, but whatever vile retort he'd intended died on his lips. With a snarl of impotent rage, he turned and stormed from the room, leaving us standing in silence amidst the wreckage of his shattered lies. It was over. The war had been won. The silence that followed Derek's departure was deafening. Harper and I stood frozen, still processing the explosive confrontation that had just unfolded. Elise was the first to break the stillness, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Well, that could have gone better, she muttered, running a hand through her disheveled hair. Harper whirled on her, eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and anger. You think? That was my dad you just destroyed back there. Harper, I began, reaching out to her, but she jerked away, hugging herself tightly. Don't. Just don't. Her voice cracked, and I watched in dismay as tears spilled down her cheeks. How could you do this, Mom? How could you keep this from me? The accusation in her tone was like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Sweetie, I was just trying to protect you. Protect me? She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. From what? The truth? The fact that my own father is a lying, cheating scumbag? Each word lanced through me, raw and agonizing. Elise stepped forward, her expression softening. Harper, your mom did what she had to do to keep you both safe. Derek is a dangerous man, and I don't want to hear it. Harper exploded, whirling on Elise with clenched fists. You have no idea what you've done, what this is going to do to our family. The anguish in her voice cut me to the core. I wanted nothing more than to take her in my arms, to shield her from the pain and betrayal that had torn our lives asunder. But I knew, deep down, that this was a wound that could not be salved with empty platitudes or motherly affection. This was a hurt that ran bone deep, a festering wound that had been ripped open and left to bleed. Harper, please. I tried again, fighting to keep my voice steady. I never wanted to lie to you, but Derek, he was out of control. He was stealing from me, sabotaging my business, and I was afraid if I told you the truth, he might. Might what? She spat, rounding on me with fresh venom. Hurt us? Abandon us? Well, congratulations, Mom, because now he's going to do both of those things, and so much worse. Her words hit their mark, and I flinched as if struck. Because deep down I knew she was right. In my quest for justice, for vengeance against the man who had betrayed and belittled me, I had set in motion a chain of events that would undoubtedly tear our family apart. Derek's fury knew no bounds, and now that he had been backed into a corner, exposed as the monster he truly was, there was no telling how far he might go to make us pay. A small, traitorous voice whispered that perhaps it would have been better to simply cut my losses, to walk away and start anew. But I knew, in my heart of hearts, that such a path would have led only to more pain, more suffering at his hands. No, I had done the right thing, the only thing I could do to protect Harper and myself from his toxic influence. But that knowledge did little to dull the ache of my daughter's resentment, the guilt that gnawed at my soul for the turmoil I had thrust upon her. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. "I'm so sorry." For a long moment Harper simply stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and fled the room, leaving me standing amidst the wreckage of our fractured family. Elise's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. "Give her time, she'll come around." But as I listened to the distant echo of Harper's footsteps, rapidly retreating, I couldn't help but wonder if the damage I had wrought was too deep, too catastrophic to ever be undone. The divorce proceedings were brutal, a no-holds-barred battle fueled by years of pent-up resentment and betrayal. Derek, his back against the wall, fought like a cornered animal, lashing out with every underhanded tactic in the book. "She's an unfit mother," he snarled during one particularly heated hearing, his eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. "Manipulative, vindictive. Is that really the kind of influence you want around an impressionable young girl?" I bit back the urge to retaliate, forcing myself to remain composed as Elise rose to my defense. "Your Honor, these baseless accusations are nothing more than a desperate attempt to distract from the real issue at hand, Mr. Collins' repeated embezzlement and financial malfeasance." Derek's face purpled, but before he could unleash another volley of vitriol, the judge intervened. "That's enough, Mr. Collins. I've seen the evidence, and it paints a very clear picture of your actions. Unless you have something of substance to add, I suggest you remain silent." Seething, Derek slumped back in his chair, glowering at me from beneath hooded brows. The message in his eyes was clear. This was far from over. With each passing day, the divisions within our shattered family grew deeper and more pronounced. Harper, caught in the crossfire, retreated further into herself, alternating between bouts of stony silence and explosive outbursts directed at both Derek and me. "I hate you both," she raged one night, hurling a glass against the wall with enough force to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. "You've ruined everything." I flinched as shards exploded around me, piercing my skin with 1,000 tiny lacerations. But the physical pain paled in comparison to the agony of watching my little girl unravel before my eyes. Derek, of course, seized the opportunity to drive the wedge deeper, pulling Harper aside and no doubt filling her head with his twisted version of events. "Don't listen to a word that lying bitch says," I overheard him hiss, his voice dripping with venom. "She's poison, Harper, and she'll only drag you down with her." Part of me wanted to intervene, to shield my daughter from his toxic influence, but a larger, wiser part knew that such actions would only breed more resentment, more ammunition for Derek's manipulative games. So I kept my distance, focusing my energy on the legal battle that would decide the course of our future. With Elise's guidance, I pored over financial statements and witness testimonies, building an impenetrable case against the man who had once sworn to love and cherish me. The realization that our marriage had devolved into this bitter adversarial farce left a hollow ache in my chest. But I knew there was no going back, no chance of salvaging what had been lost. Derek had made his choices, and now he would have to face the consequences. As the divorce proceedings ground on, the media caught wind of our sordid drama, unleashing a torrent of salacious headlines and intrusive reporters. Derek, ever the opportunist, seized his chance to manipulate the narrative, granting exclusive interviews where he painted himself as the long-suffering victim of a deranged, money-hungry shrew. "She's out for blood, plain and simple," he lamented to one particularly eager journalist, his eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "All I ever wanted was to give my family a good life, but it was never enough for Raylan. She let her greed, her delusions of grandeur consume her." I watched in disgust as his lies played out across newspapers and television screens, each fabrication more outrageous than the last. But I refused to take the bait, to engage in the same mudslinging tactics that Derek had embraced so wholeheartedly. No, I would let the evidence speak for itself. The truth was on my side, and try as he might, Derek could never bury that beneath a mountain of deceit and slander. As the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, I found myself longing for the quiet solace of my work, the simple act of creation that had once brought me such joy and fulfillment. But even that refuge had been tainted, the very business I had poured my heart and soul into, now serving as a battleground between Derek and me. In my darkest moments, I wondered if it had all been worth it, the pain, the betrayal, the shattering of everything I had once held dear. But then I would look at Harper, my beautiful, struggling girl caught in the crossfire of her parents' war, and I would know that I had done the only thing I could. For her sake, and for my own self-respect, I had to keep fighting. No matter how high the cost, I would not let Derek emerge victorious from the ashes of our family. Not this time. The day of the final court hearing dawned cold and gray, the somber weather mirroring the weight that had settled over my shoulders. As Elise and I made our way through the courthouse doors, a phalanx of reporters descended upon us, cameras flashing and microphones thrust into our faces. "Miss Collins, is it true you're seeking full custody of your daughter? How do you respond to the allegations that you've been embezzling funds from your own company? Care to comment on the rumors of your husband's alleged affair?" I brushed past them without a word, my jaw clenched in grim determination. Derek, of course, was reveling in the spectacle, pausing every few steps to preen for the cameras and offer up sound bites tailored to paint him as the long-suffering victim. "All I've ever wanted is to protect my little girl," he simpered, his expression one of studied anguish. "But Raylan, she's become unhinged, obsessed with money and revenge. It's tragic, really." I felt Elise tense beside me, and I placed a warning hand on her arm. "Don't take the bait," I murmured. "He's not worth it." Her nostrils flared, but she gave a curt nod, and we continued on our way, leaving Derek to bask in the spotlight he so desperately craved. The courtroom was packed to the rafters, a veritable circus of lawyers, journalists, and gawking spectators. I scanned the crowd, my heart lurching as I spotted Harper sitting towards the back, her shoulders hunched and her gaze determinedly averted from both Derek and me. As the proceedings got underway, it became immediately apparent that the judge had little patience for Derek's grandstanding. He cut through the other man's bloated testimony with razor-sharp precision, dismantling his arguments one by one with cold, irrefutable logic. "You claim your wife was obsessed with money and revenge, Mr. Collins," the judge stated, his voice ringing with thinly veiled disdain. "And yet, the financial records clearly show that you embezzled over $500,000 from her company's accounts over the course of 5 years. How do you explain that?" Derek squirmed in his seat, his bravado faltering under the weight of the damning evidence. "It was a misunderstanding, Your Honor. I was simply lying and stealing from your wife, with whom you had entered into a legal contract as a business partner," the judge interrupted, his eyes flashing. "That's what the evidence shows, Mr. Collins. Shall I go on?" As the judge methodically disassembled Derek's house of lies, I could practically feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. Beside me, Elise radiated quiet triumph, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. When the judge finally rendered his verdict, it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from Derek's sails and leaving him reeling. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, I am awarding Miss Collins full ownership of her company, as well as sole custody of her daughter, Harper. Mr. Collins, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $600,000, as well as alimony and child support to be determined at a later date." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom, broken only by the muted sobs of a devastated Derek. Elise reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she murmured. "It's over." But as I turned to face my daughter, my heart plummeted. Harper was staring at me, her expression unreadable, a chasm of hurt and betrayal stretching between us. In that moment, I knew that while the legal battle might be won, the war for my daughter's heart and trust was only just beginning. In the days that followed, Derek's world crumbled around him. His assets were seized, his reputation in tatters. But through it all, he maintained a defiant front, lashing out at anyone and everyone who dared cross his path. It was during one such outburst that Harper, who had been steadfastly avoiding me, finally emerged from the shadows of her self-imposed exile. "You're pathetic," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt as Derek raged and raved in the aftermath of yet another court ruling. All this time, I thought Mom was the one destroying this family, but you're the real cancer, aren't you? Derek whirled on her, his face contorted in an ugly snarl. Watch your mouth, you ungrateful little... No, you watch yours. Harper stepped forward, her chin raised in defiant challenge. I'm done listening to your lies, your manipulations. You're a sad, bitter man, and you've got no one to blame but yourself for the mess you've made of your life. As her words washed over him, I saw something shift in Derek's eyes, a flicker of doubt, of dawning realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. For a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then the moment passed, and the sneer was back, twisted and grotesque. You'll regret this, he hissed, jabbing a finger in Harper's face. You and your bitch of a mother will regret the day you ever crossed me. Harper didn't so much as flinch. Save it for someone who still cares, Dad. You're nothing but a pathetic bully, and I'm done being afraid of you. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Derek gaping in her wake like a landed fish. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments, and in that fleeting glance I saw a glimmer of the old Harper, strong, defiant, unbroken. In that moment, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together. United, emboldened by the truth that had finally set us free. Derek might have lost everything, but I had regained something far more precious. My daughter's respect, her trust. And that was a victory worth fighting for. The weeks following the divorce were a whirlwind of activity. With Derek's vindictive presence finally excised from our lives, Harper and I were free to pick up the pieces and begin rebuilding. Gone were the tense silences, the hostile glares and cutting remarks. In their place was a newfound openness, a willingness to communicate and heal the wounds that had been left to fester for far too long. I'm sorry, Mom, Harper murmured one night as we sat on the patio, nursing mugs of hot chocolate beneath the star-studded sky, for the way I acted, for shutting you out when you needed me most. I reached over and squeezed her hand, my heart swelling with a potent mix of love and relief. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetie. What's important is that we're here now, together. That's all that matters. She offered a tentative smile, and in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the carefree girl she had once been, untainted by the bitter rancor of her parents' war. The sight filled me with a renewed sense of determination. I would do whatever it took to shield her from further pain, to ensure that the damage wrought by Derek's actions did not define the rest of her life. With that goal in mind, I threw myself into resurrecting my fashion line, channeling all the fire and passion that had once fueled my every design. Harper, to my immense pride, joined me wholeheartedly, her artistic flair and keen eye breathing fresh life into my creations. You know, this whole sustainability thing is actually kind of cool, she remarked one afternoon as we pored over a pile of discarded fabric swatches. Who knew old rags could look so chic? I laughed, reveling in the sound of her teasing lilt. I tried to tell you, didn't I? But you were too busy mocking your poor, delusional mother. She pulled a face, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Yeah, well, I was young and stupid. Not to mention, brainwashed by a certain lying snake of a father. The barb stung, but I knew there was no venom behind it, only the stark truth that we were both still coming to terms with. Reaching out, I cupped her cheek, marveling at the way she leaned into my touch rather than recoiling. The important thing is, we're here now, together, and nothing is ever going to tear us apart again. The words felt like a vow, a solemn promise to the both of us. Harper's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them away, offering me a watery smile. You're right. It's you and me against the world, Mom. Always and forever. As our new line began to take shape, the media caught wind of our triumphant reemergence, fueling a flurry of interest and speculation. Interview requests poured in, each more eager than the last to get the inside scoop on our phoenix-like rise from the ashes of scandal and betrayal. I dismissed them all with a polite but firm refusal. This story, our story, was not fodder for the gossip rags or salacious tell-alls. It was ours, a hard-won victory forged in the fires of pain and heartbreak. The only validation I needed was the look of pride in Harper's eyes as we put the finishing touches on our debut collection. Gone were the dark circles and haunted gaze. In their place was a radiant, effervescent joy that warmed me to my very core. "We did it, Mom," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate stitching of one particularly striking ensemble. "Against all odds, we actually pulled this off." Wrapping an arm around her shoulders, I pulled her close, savoring the moment. "Of course we did, baby girl. When have you ever known your mother to back down from a fight?" She laughed, the sound ringing like music through the bustling studio. Fair point. Though to be honest, I think it was my stubborn determination that really saved the day. "Is that so?" I arched an eyebrow, unable to resist the playful banter. "Well, in that case, maybe I should start calling you Mom instead." Harper made a face, sticking out her tongue. "On second thought, let's not go that far. One diva in the family is more than enough." We dissolved into a fit of giggles, the easy camaraderie a soothing balm on the wounds of the past. In that moment, it was as if the years of turmoil and heartache had never happened. We were just a mother and daughter, united in our love for each other and the craft that had helped heal us both. The night of our launch party, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Harper was radiant in one of our signature creations, her megawatt smile lighting up the room as she worked the crowd with effortless poise. Watching her charm and dazzle the assembled fashionistas and industry bigwigs, I felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly stole my breath away. This was her moment, our moment, and no one, not Derek, not the naysayers who had doubted us at every turn, could ever take that away. As the night drew to a close and the last of the well-wishers trickled out, Harper made her way over to me, her eyes sparkling with unbridled joy. "Well," she murmured, looping her arm through mine, "what did you think? Was it everything you dreamed it would be?" Pulling her close, I pressed a kiss to her temple, my heart so full I thought it might burst. "It was more than I ever could have imagined," I whispered fiercely, "and it's only the beginning, baby girl, for both of us." As we stood there, silhouetted against the twinkling lights of our newfound success, I knew that no matter what challenges the future held, we would face them head-on, side by side, unbroken, unstoppable, invincible. A mother and daughter, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the indomitable strength of our bond. Our story was far from over. It had only just begun. I thought I had it all figured out. The perfect bakery, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. But as I walked into my bakery that fateful morning, I realized everything I thought I knew was about to crumble. The chalkboard sign outside my bakery, Julianne's Artisan Breads, usually greeted customers with a cheerful message. But this morning, the words scrawled across it made my heart sink. "You think you've baked the sweet life, Julianne, but I'm about to add some sour." I stared at the ominous message, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the front door. What did this mean? Who was threatening me? As I stepped inside, the familiar aroma of freshly baked bread did little to calm my nerves. "Carlos, did you see this?" I called out to my most trusted employee, who was already busy preparing for the day's baking. Carlos emerged from the back, wiping the flour from his hands. "Sigh, Julianne, I found it when I arrived this morning. Any idea who could be behind this?" I shook my head, trying to maintain my composure. "No, not a clue, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this." Just then, the sound of the bell above the front door announced the arrival of my husband, Brett. I watched as he strode in, his usual charming smile in place. "Morning, honey." He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head, unable to hide my distress. "Brett, did you see the message on the chalkboard?" His brow furrowed in concern. "What message? I just got here." I recounted the ominous warning, searching his face for any sign of recognition or guilt. "Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" Brett's eyes widened, and he placed a comforting hand on my arm. "Julianne, I'm as shocked as you are. This is clearly some kind of twisted prank. Don't worry, we'll figure it out together." I wanted to believe him, but something in the way he avoided my gaze made me uneasy. Before I could press him further, the bell above the door chimed again and my assistant Elena strode in. "Good morning, Julianne," she greeted me with a bright smile. "And hello, Brett. Did you two see the message out front? Isn't it just dreadful?" The way she glanced at Brett as she spoke sent a chill down my spine. Had they planned this together? I studied their interactions, searching for any sign of familiarity beyond what was appropriate between an employee and her boss's husband. "Yes, we saw it," I replied, my voice tight. I'm gonna call the police and see if they can shed any light on this. Oh, Julianne, I'm sure it's just a silly prank, Elena said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Let's not overreact. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. And the way Brett's gaze kept shifting between us only heightened my suspicion. Something was wrong, very wrong. And I was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. The rest of that day was a blur as I tried to make sense of the cryptic message and my growing suspicions about Brett and Elena. Something wasn't right, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. As I went about my usual bakery routine, I found myself scrutinizing every interaction between my husband and my assistant. The way their eyes would linger on each other, the subtle shifts in their body language, it all felt like a betrayal. That evening, after the bakery had closed and Carlos had gone home, I approached Brett in our modest apartment above the shop. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. Brett looked up from the newspaper he was reading, his brow furrowing in concern. "What's wrong, honey?" "Don't honey me," I snapped. "I want to know what's going on between you and Elena." His eyes widened, and he quickly folded the newspaper, setting it aside. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Elena's my employee, nothing more." I narrowed my eyes, studying his face for any sign of deception. "Really? Because I've noticed the way you two look at each other, the way you've been spending more time with her, even when it's not necessary for the bakery." Brett let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "Julianne, you're being ridiculous. Elena is simply a hard-working employee who I value. There's nothing going on between us." "I don't believe you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think you and Elena are plotting something against me and my bakery." Brett's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked genuinely shocked. "Julianne, how could you even think that? I love you, and this bakery is our dream. Why would I ever want to betray that?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes. "But that message on the chalkboard and the way you two have been acting, it all feels like a betrayal." Brett reached out to me, but I flinched away from his touch. "Julianne, please, you have to believe me. I would never do anything to hurt you or our bakery. You're the most important thing in the world to me." I shook my head, unwilling to accept his reassurances. "I want you to leave. I can't be around you right now." "Julianne, please," Brett pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Don't do this. Let's talk it through. I love you and I would never betray you." But I had made up my mind. "Just go, Brett. I need time to think." As he reluctantly gathered his things and left the apartment, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a deep ache in my chest. Had I really just kicked my husband out? What if I was wrong about all of this? I sank down onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the tears finally broke free. Everything I thought I knew was crumbling, and I had no idea what to do next. One thing was certain, though. I had to get to the bottom of this. I couldn't let Brett and Elena get away with whatever they were plotting. My bakery, my life, was on the line, and I was determined to fight for it, no matter the cost. As I sat alone in the apartment, the weight of my confrontation with Brett hung heavy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that he and Elena were up to something, but I needed more proof. I knew I couldn't take them on alone, not with the power they held over my bakery. That's when I remembered my next-door neighbor, Maggie. She was a sharp-witted lawyer, and I knew she would be just the person I needed to help me uncover the truth. I hurried downstairs and across the street to Maggie's house, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I knocked on her door, and she answered, her brow furrowing with concern as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Julianne, what's wrong?" she asked, ushering me inside. I quickly explained the situation, the cryptic message, my suspicions about Brett and Elena, and the confrontation in our apartment. Maggie's eyes widened with surprise. "Wow, Julianne, that's a lot to take in. But I have to say, your instincts sound right on the money. There's definitely something fishy going on." "I know," I said, wringing my hands. "I just don't know what to do. I can't lose my bakery, Maggie. It's my life's work, and I can't let Brett and Elena take it from me." Maggie placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Don't worry, Julianne. I'm here to help. We'll get to the bottom of this, and I'll make sure you keep your bakery. I felt a surge of relief at her words. Thank you, Maggie. I don't know what I'd do without you. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up outside caught our attention. I peered out the window and recognized Carlos, one of my most trusted bakery employees, hurrying up the walkway. Maggie and I answered the door, and Carlos immediately launched into an urgent explanation. Julianne, I think something is very wrong. I was doing the weekly inventory, and I noticed some discrepancies in the numbers. I think Brett and Alina may be embezzling money from the bakery. My heart sank, and Maggie's eyes narrowed with determination. That's exactly what we were just talking about, Carlos. Julianne needs our help to take them down. Carlos nodded, his brow furrowed with concern. I'm with you, Julianne. This bakery is my second home, and I won't let them destroy it. The three of us huddled together, our heads bent low as we hatched a plan. Maggie would use her legal expertise to help us gather the necessary evidence, while Carlos and I would continue to monitor the bakery's finances and operations. As we parted ways, a newfound sense of purpose filled me. I may have been betrayed by the two people I trusted most, but I had the support of my allies. Together, we would take down Brett and Elena and reclaim my bakery. I returned to the apartment, my mind racing with the details of our plan. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. This was my life's work, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me without a fight. As the sun began to set, I looked out over the bustling streets of our small town, a steely resolve taking hold. Brett and Alina had underestimated me, and they were about to learn a hard lesson. You don't mess with Julianne and her bakery. Over the next few weeks, Maggie, Carlos, and I executed our plan with precision and determination. We meticulously gathered evidence of Brett and Alina's embezzlement and their plans to take over my bakery. It was a delicate dance, but I was fueled by a fire that refused to be extinguished. The day of our sting operation finally arrived, and I felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as I waited for Brett and Alina to arrive. Maggie had arranged for a select group of community leaders and influential patrons to witness the confrontation, and I knew this was our best chance to expose their betrayal. As Brett and Elena walked through the bakery doors, their expressions shifting from confusion to thinly veiled panic, I knew the game was on. Julianne, what's going on? Brett asked, his voice laced with apprehension. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as I faced them. Brett, Elena, I've gathered everyone here today because I have something I need to share with you and our community. I gestured to Maggie, who stepped forward, a stack of documents in her hands. Over the past few weeks, we've uncovered evidence that you two have been embezzling funds from Julianne's bakery, Maggie announced, her voice firm and unwavering. We have bank statements, receipts, and witness accounts that prove your involvement in a plot to take over this business. Brett's face drained of color, and Elena's eyes darted around the room, her lips pressed into a thin line. This is absurd. Brett exclaimed, his hands trembling. Julianne, how could you do this to me, to us? I felt a pang of sadness, but I refused to let it sway me. Don't play the victim, Brett. We have the proof, and we're not going to let you get away with this. Elena stepped forward, her expression defiant. You have no idea what you're up against, Julianne. This bakery is ours, and we'll do whatever it takes to keep it. The room erupted in shocked murmurs, and I knew we had struck a nerve. Maggie raised her hand, commanding the attention of the crowd. That's where you're wrong, Elena. This bakery belongs to Julianne, and we're not going to let you or Brett take it from her. We have all the evidence we need to take this to court and ensure that justice is served. Brett and Elena exchanged a desperate look, and I could see the realization dawning on their faces. They were trapped, and their carefully constructed plan was unraveling before their eyes. You won't get away with this, Brett hissed, his eyes narrowed with fury. I stepped forward, my gaze unwavering. Oh, but we already have. This bakery is my life's work, and I won't let you or anyone else take it from me. I'm prepared to fight for it, no matter what it takes. The room erupted in a chorus of murmurs and applause, and I knew in that moment that the tide had turned. Brett and Elena were no longer the ones in control. I was. As the community members gathered around me, offering their support and congratulations, I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. This was just the beginning of the battle, but I was more determined than ever to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The aftermath of the confrontation with Brett and Elena sent shockwaves through our tight-knit community. Word of their betrayal and my efforts to expose their scheme spread like wildfire, and suddenly I found myself at the center of a heated public debate. On one side, there were those who rallied behind me, praising my courage and determination in standing up to the deceit. They commended my actions and vowed to continue supporting my bakery. But on the other side, there were those who questioned my methods, arguing that I had gone too far in publicly humiliating my own husband and his accomplice. As I stood at the counter of my bakery, watching the steady stream of customers come and go, I couldn't help but feel a growing unease. The community I had once thought of as my family was now divided, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had somehow crossed a line. One day, as I was preparing the dough for the day's bread, a familiar face stepped through the door. It was Maggie, her brow furrowed with concern. "Julianne, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and serious. I wiped my hands on my apron and gestured for her to follow me into the back. "What is it, Maggie?" "I've been hearing some rumblings around town," she began, her expression grave. "Some people are starting to question the way you went about this whole thing. They're saying you took it too far, that you should have handled it more discreetly." I felt my heart sink. "What? But we had the evidence, Maggie. We were just trying to protect the bakery." She placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "I know, Julianne, and I stand by you. But you have to understand, not everyone sees it that way. There's a growing sentiment that you were more interested in revenge than justice." I shook my head, my hands clenching into fists. "That's not true. I was just trying to save my life's work, my legacy. How can they not see that?" Maggie sighed heavily. "I know, Julianne, but the reality is you're facing a battle on two fronts now. The legal one against Brett and Elena and the court of public opinion. And that second one could be just as dangerous." I felt a surge of frustration and despair. "So what am I supposed to do, Maggie? Just let them get away with it?" "I can't do that, not after everything they've done." "I'm not saying that," Maggie replied, her tone measured. "But you need to be careful. The more you push, the more you risk alienating the very people who could be your greatest allies." Her words weighed heavily on me as I returned to the front of the bakery, my mind racing. I had thought that exposing Brett and Elena's betrayal would be the end of the battle. But now it seemed that I was facing an even greater challenge, rebuilding the trust and loyalty of my community. As the day wore on, I found myself second-guessing my actions, wondering if I had gone too far in my quest for justice. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a grave mistake in my pursuit of revenge. I knew I had to find a way to mend the fractures in my community, to show them that my actions were not driven by personal animus, but by a deep-rooted desire to protect the legacy I had built. It was going to be an uphill battle, but I was determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. In the wake of the public confrontation, the bakery became the epicenter of a heated battle for the hearts and minds of the community. On one side, there were those who rallied behind me, unwavering in their support and outrage over Brett and Elena's betrayal. But on the other, a growing faction questioned my methods and accused me of taking things too far. The battle lines were drawn, and I found myself caught in the middle, struggling to keep my bakery afloat amidst the chaos. One morning, as I was setting up the shop, the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see a familiar face. Dean, the talented young baker I had recently hired. "Julianne, can I have a word?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I gestured for him to follow me to the back, my heart sinking with dread. "What is it, Dean?" He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on mine. "I've been hearing some troubling things around town. People are saying that you went too far in exposing Brett and Elena's betrayal. They think you should have handled it more discreetly." I felt my hands clench into fists, frustration bubbling up inside me. "Dean, you know as well as I do that Brett and Elena were plotting to take this bakery away from me. I couldn't just sit back and let that happen." He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I understand, Julianne. I really do. But you have to understand, not everyone sees it that way. There's a growing sentiment that you were more interested in revenge than justice. I let out a bitter laugh. Revenge? This isn't about revenge, Dean. This is about protecting my life's work, my legacy. How can they not see that? Dean placed a reassuring hand on my arm. I believe you, Julianne. But you have to understand, the more you push back, the more you risk alienating the very people who could be your greatest allies. I shook my head, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. So what am I supposed to do, Dean? Just let them get away with it? No, of course not, he replied, his voice calm and measured. But you need to be strategic about this. You need to find a way to win back the trust of the community, to show them that your actions were driven by a desire to protect, not destroy. I chewed on my lip, my mind racing, as I tried to come up with a plan. Okay, so what do you suggest I do? Dean's lips curved into a small smile. Well, for starters, we could use this as an opportunity to showcase your bakery's strengths. We could host a community event, something that brings people together and reminds them of the positive impact your business has had on the town. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope ignite within me. That's a good idea. We could do a baking workshop, or maybe a charity event where we donate a portion of the proceeds to a local organization. Exactly, Dean said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, and we can use it as a chance to show the community that you're not just fighting for yourself, but for the greater good of this town. I felt a surge of gratitude towards Dean, his support and guidance a much-needed lifeline in the midst of the chaos. Thank you, Dean. I don't know what I'd do without you. He smiled and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. That's what friends are for. Now let's get to work on planning this event. We've got a community to win back. With a renewed sense of purpose, I rolled up my sleeves and dove headfirst into the task at hand, determined to reclaim my place in the hearts and minds of the people I had once called my own. The community event we organized was a resounding success, drawing crowds of eager participants and restoring a sense of unity and purpose within the town. As I watched people engage in baking workshops, share stories, and come together in support of local charities, I felt a cautious optimism begin to take root. However, the legal battle against Brett and Elena continued to rage on, and the strain was beginning to take its toll. Maggie worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing our case. But Brett and his team of high-powered lawyers fought tooth and nail to thwart our efforts. The day of the trial arrived, and I found myself standing outside the courthouse, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and determination. Maggie placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You ready for this, Julianne? She asked, her voice low and serious. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, as ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this. As we entered the courtroom, I spotted Brett and Elena seated at the defense table, their expressions a mask of defiance. I steeled myself, refusing to let their presence rattle me. The proceedings began, with Maggie meticulously laying out our case, presenting the evidence we had gathered over the past months. She painted a damning picture of Brett and Elena's scheme, leaving no room for doubt. But Brett and his attorneys were relentless, throwing up roadblock after roadblock, challenging every piece of evidence and questioning the validity of our claims. At one point, the opposing counsel turned their sights on me, their questioning becoming increasingly aggressive. Miss Julianne, isn't it true that you resorted to underhanded tactics in your quest to expose my clients? The lawyer, a slick-haired man with a sharp, accusatory gaze, asked. I felt my hackles rise, but I forced myself to remain calm. I did what I had to do to protect my livelihood and the legacy I've built in this community. Brett and Elena's actions left me with no other choice. So you admit that your methods were questionable at best? The lawyer pressed, his tone dripping with disdain. I shook my head, my eyes narrowing. My methods were necessary to uncover the truth and prevent a greater injustice. I refused to apologize for standing up for what's right. The lawyer's lips curled into a sneer. And yet, the very community you claim to care about has turned against you. Isn't that proof enough that your actions were more about personal vengeance than justice? I felt my heart sink as I glanced around the courtroom, seeing the uncertainty and skepticism etched on the faces of the onlookers. Had I truly gone too far in my quest for retribution? Before I could respond, Maggie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. Objection, Your Honor. The counsel is clearly attempting to discredit my client through irrelevant and inflammatory questioning. The judge nodded, his brow furrowed. Sustained. The counsel will refrain from making such accusations and stick to the facts of the case. As the trial continued, I watched with bated breath as the evidence mounted against Brett and Alina. Their web of lies unraveled, exposing the depth of their betrayal and their desperate attempts to cover their tracks. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Brett and Alina were found guilty of embezzlement and conspiracy to defraud. As the judge delivered the sentence, I felt a sense of vindication, but it was tempered by the realization that the cost of my victory had been higher than I ever imagined. As the dust settled on the trial, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication, knowing that justice had prevailed and that Brett and Alina would face the consequences of their actions. But on the other, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling of unease that had taken root within me. The community that had once rallied behind me was now fractured, with some still harboring resentment towards my methods. I knew I had to find a way to mend those wounds, to rebuild the trust and unity that had once defined our little town. One morning, as I was opening the bakery, the familiar sound of the bell above the door announced the arrival of Dean. He strode in, a determined glint in his eye. "Julianne, I've been thinking," he began, his voice tinged with excitement. "I think it's time we take the bakery in a new direction." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, Dean?" He leaned in, his expression earnest. "Well, we've been through a lot these past few months, and I think it's time we use this as an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to show the community that this bakery is about more than just bread and pastries. It's about bringing people together, about being a pillar of this town." I listened intently, feeling a spark of hope ignite within me. "I'm listening." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I froze in the hallway, hands trembling, as the conversation in the living room pierced my ears. "We need a new wife for Mitchell who can give us a grandson to carry on the family name," Franklin's gruff voice resonated. "That Adrienne is a failure. 15 years and she couldn't produce a male heir." My heart pounded, breath growing shallow. This couldn't be happening. "I agree," Louise chimed in, her tone laced with disdain. "It's time we found Mitchell a younger, more fertile replacement." Mitchell remained silent, his lack of objection a deafening betrayal. I clutched the wall for support, fighting the urge to burst through the door. How could the man I loved, the man whose family I had sacrificed everything for, be so complicit in this vile scheme? "Perhaps a woman from a respectable family this time," Franklin continued, driving the knife deeper. "Not some inexperienced nobody like Adrienne." Tears stung my eyes as their venomous insults lacerated my soul. All the belittling, the years of walking on eggshells in my own home, it had led to this. My disposal like a worn piece of furniture. The room fell silent. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't discover me eavesdropping. Footsteps approached, and I scrambled back towards the stairs, my heart in my throat. As I reached the top step, Ella appeared at the end of the hallway. "Mom, is everything okay?" I startled, her voice shattering my frantic haze. My beautiful, innocent daughter, would she become another casualty of this family's ruthless ambition? "Everything's fine, sweetie," I lied, forcing a smile as I pulled her into an embrace. "Just got a little dizzy, that's all." As I stroked her hair, my mind whirled. This couldn't go on any longer. Enough was enough. Those vicious snakes downstairs had awoken a protective fury within me, one that would stop at nothing to shelter my daughter from their toxicity. We had sacrificed too much already. My once blossoming career, laid to waste years ago when Mitchell insisted I be a stay-at-home wife to appease his controlling parents. All the demeaning comments, the constant dismissal of my role in this household, I had endured it for Ella's sake, hoping to preserve some semblance of family. But now they sought to tear us apart, to discard me and destroy the life I had desperately clung to. Not anymore. Those delusional fools had ignited an unquenchable fire within me. I would burn their twisted legacy to the ground. Sleep evaded me that night, as the venomous words replayed in my mind like a broken record. I tossed and turned, haunted by the prospect of being torn from my own family by those deceitful vipers downstairs. Mitchell remained oblivious, snoring beside me as if his parents hadn't just signed my death warrant. How could he be so blind, so resigned to their manipulative ways? The memories came flooding back, the demoralizing comments about my inability to birth a son, the snide remarks diminishing my role as a wife and mother. All along, it had been building towards this sick ultimatum. As dawn broke, I rose quietly, my restless mind swirling with anger and determination. Peering into Ella's room, I watched her sleep peacefully, her face a vision of tranquil innocence. She deserved so much better than this twisted farce of a family. Descending the stairs, I braced myself for the onslaught that would come. Franklin and Louise were already seated at the breakfast table, their expressions stern as gunshots. Well, if it isn't our useless daughter-in-law," Franklin sneered as I entered. "Did you finally come to your senses about providing us with a real heir?" My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. "How dare you treat me with such disrespect in my own home?" Louise scoffed. "This is our home, you ungrateful fool, and you'll soon learn your place when Mitchell finds himself a new wife." The audacity of her words ignited my fury. "Over my dead body, I've sacrificed everything for this family, subjecting myself to your demeaning insults and archaic expectations." "Expectations you failed to meet," Franklin countered, his eyes narrowing to callous slits. 15 years without a grandson. You're the failure here, not us." I recoiled as if struck, their cruelty seeming to manifest as physical blows against my psyche. Mitchell entered, his brow furrowed. "What's with all the yelling?" "Your precious wife has finally found her voice," Louise spat. "Pity she didn't put that fire into producing an heir." Mitchell's gaze fell, his jaw tensing but no words escaping his lips. My heart sank. He wouldn't defend me, not against his poisonous parents. In that moment, any remnant of love I felt withered on the vine. This marriage, this family, it was all a lie perpetuated by heartless tyrants obsessed with legacy over humanity. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. If they thought they could bully me into quiet submission, they were gravely mistaken. Steeling my nerves, I met Franklin's menacing glare with unwavering defiance. "You want a new woman for your spawn? You'll have to kill me first, because I'll burn this whole damn facade to the ground before letting you inflict your soulless dominance over me or my daughter." Their stunned silence spoke volumes. They had awoken a vengeful spirit they couldn't tame. Let the games begin. In the aftermath of my defiant outburst, a tense silence blanketed the house. Franklin and Louise avoided me like the plague, scowling whenever our paths crossed. Mitchell remained his typical apathetic self, seemingly oblivious to the war brewing under his own roof. My sole solace came from Ella, whose bright spirit served as a beacon during those turbulent days. But even she couldn't the darkness creeping into her eyes, the byproduct of this family's endless toxicity. "Mom, why do Grandpa and Grandma always treat you like that?" she asked one afternoon as we prepared dinner. I froze, uncertain how to respond without shattering her innocence. "They're just set in their ways, honey. Old-fashioned thinking." Her brow furrowed. "But the way they talk to you, it's not right." Sliding the casserole into the oven, I pulled her into a tight embrace, my heart aching at her precocious awareness. She deserved so much better than this poisonous environment. A knock at the door interrupted our moment. I answered to find Leo, one of the graphic designers from my former workplace, standing on the doorstep. "Leo, what are you doing here?" "I tried calling, but you didn't answer," he said, wringing his hands nervously. "I have some things I need to tell you, in private." Something in his tone hinted at its importance. "Of course, come in." As we settled in the living room, Leo's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a somber frown. "Adrian, I don't know how to say this." My heart raced, fearing the worst. "What is it?" He exhaled deeply. "It's about Mitchell's family business. There are rumors circulating about illegal practices, tax evasion, shady dealings, you name it. I wanted to give you a heads up." The air left my lungs in a forceful gust. Of course, why was I even surprised at this point? Franklin's obsession with legacy must have clouded any semblance of ethics or morality. "Are you sure about this?" I pressed. An idea sparked in my mind, a possible path to freedom from this wretched family's clutches. Leo nodded solemnly. "I've heard it from multiple sources. Just be careful, Adrian. These aren't the type of people you want to cross. As if on cue, Franklin's booming voice echoed through the hall. Who are you talking to, you insolent? He stopped short at the sight of Leo, his expression contorting into a mask of fury and trepidation. In that fleeting moment, I glimpsed the panic in the old bastard's eyes. He knew, and he knew that I knew. No longer would we cower under the weight of their contemptible actions. Armed with this newfound knowledge, the shackles began to loosen. Everything okay, Adrienne? Leo's concerned voice shattered the tension. I met Franklin's widening glare with a subtle smirk. Everything's just fine. In fact, it's better than it's been in a long time. The game was afoot, the first counterattack in my quest to dismantle their toxic empire. Justice would be served, by any means necessary. Franklin and Louise descended upon me like a pack of rabid wolves the following day. Their faces were twisted into snarling masks of rage, eyes burning with unbridled fury. Who was that man in our home yesterday? Franklin spat, slamming his fist on the kitchen counter. Bringing strange men around without our permission? Louise crowded me against the refrigerator, her thin lips curled into a sneer. Trying to find a replacement for our pathetic son already? You conniving little. That's enough. I silenced her tirade, squaring my shoulders in defiance. That strange man is a former colleague. Unlike you two, he actually treats me with basic human decency. Franklin's eyes narrowed to predatory slits. Watch your tone, girl. This is still our house. For now, I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for his ears to prick up. Before he could respond, Mitchell's oblivious voice rang out from the living room. Mom, Dad, are we still going to Aunt Kathy's party tonight? As if a switch had flipped, Franklin and Louise's faces melted into grandfatherly masks of benevolence. Of course, son, Franklin called out jovially. We'll be right there. With one final scathing glare in my direction, they disappeared down the hallway, their sickening charade already in full swing. I doubled over, hands bracing against the counter as I struggled to catch my breath. This incessant gaslighting and emotional whiplash left me constantly on edge, my defenses forever raised. The party that evening was a waking nightmare. Kathy's lavish home was filled with Franklin and Louise's elitist cohorts, their fake smiles and vapid conversations sapping my will to exist. Mitchell reveled in the attention, basking in his family's twisted vision of success. As the evening descended into drunken revelry, Franklin seized the moment to lay into me once more. Everyone, may I have your attention? He bellowed, silencing the gathered guests. Here it comes, the public debasement he seemed to relish dishing out. I'd like to make a toast, he continued, swirling his glass of scotch. To my wonderful family, the backbone that has allowed our business to thrive all these years. Obediently, Mitchell and Kathy's family raised their glasses in celebration. My stomach turned at the sycophantic display. And a special toast. Franklin leveled his reptilian glare at me, a sinister grin creeping across his face. To my dear daughter-in-law, Adrienne, who has graced us with her boundless love and support for over 15 blessed years. The jeers and chuckles erupted immediately, raucous laughter echoing through the opulent hall. I fought back hot tears, my cheeks burning crimson with humiliation as all eyes bored into me. What's the matter, dear? Louise sneered, her voice dripping with malice. No son to help carry on the family legacy? That was it, the final indignity I could withstand. A familiar fire erupted in my soul, scorching away any remaining chains that once bound me to this abusive fiasco. I locked eyes with Franklin, my gaze hardening into steel-forged resolution. You'll get your heir, Franklin. One way or another. His smug smirk faltered ever so slightly at my ominous words. The game was evolving now, the gloves coming off in this nightmarish battle of wills. There would be no more hollow compromises or feeble acquiescence. The avenging flame had been lit. In the wake of that disastrous party, a calm determination settled over me. No more would I cower under Franklin and Louise's twisted reign of terror. The path forward was clear. I would free myself and Ella from their poisonous clutches, no matter the cost. The first step required fortifying my defenses. I reached out to Leo, confiding in him the full extent of the abuse and degradation I had endured over the years. To his credit, he didn't flinch or judge, he simply listened with a compassionate ear. You can't keep living like this, Adrienne, he said, after I had unloaded the full weight of my tortured story. This kind of toxicity, It's soul-crushing. I nodded warily. I know, but it's not just about me anymore. I need to get Ella away from their influence before it's too late. Leo leaned forward, his expression one of grim determination. Then you have to get out. Both of you, clean break and start over somewhere new. The thought simultaneously exhilarated and terrified me. Could I really just uproot my entire life and flee from Mitchell's family? From the man I had once loved? But one glance at the photo of Ella on my dresser steeled my resolve. She was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing everything to liberate us both. You're right, I said, meeting Leo's gaze with newfound conviction. I've let them control me for far too long. It's time I took my life back. A subtle smile played across Leo's lips. I might know someone who can help with that, if you're serious. My heart raced, though not with fear, with the thrilling embrace of taking that first defiant step. I'm dead serious. Over the next few weeks, the plan took shape. Leo connected me with a contact who could provide new identities and credentials for me and Ella. A fresh start, far away from Franklin's poisonous empire. I also began diligently documenting every instance of their abhorrent behavior, recording conversations with a hidden device to preserve evidence of their threats and mistreatment. The pieces were falling into place. Of course, severing ties required money. My own savings having long been drained, financing their lavish lifestyle. So I did what any reasonable person would. I began systematically pillaging their household accounts, siphoning off enough to secure a new home and transition into this new life. It was a heady rush, chipping away at the foundation of their control with every covert transfer. With each withdrawal, I could taste the sweet liberation inching ever closer. The final puzzle piece fell into place when Leo approached me one afternoon, a modest grin adorning his face. You'll never guess what just happened, he began, unable to contain his excitement. One of the ad agencies I applied to, they want me, a senior design role in Denver. My eyes widened at the implication. Denver, over 1,000 miles away, far enough to escape this waking nightmare permanently. Leo, that's incredible, I gushed, pulling him into an appreciative embrace. As we separated, his expression turned serious once more. You know, they'd be insane not to want to bring you aboard, too. With your portfolio and experience? I felt my heart swell with hope. Are you saying? A sly grin answered my unfinished query. Let's just say your escape plan just got a hell of a lot more real. Giddy excitement bubbled within me. This was it. The rebirth I had dreamed of for years, but never imagined possible. The shackles of Franklin's tyranny were rusting away with each passing day. I was ready to breathe free again. The weeks flew by in a frenzied blur as Leo and I put the final pieces of our meticulously crafted escape into place. With each passing day, my heart raced with the tantalizing promise of imminent freedom from Franklin's toxic stranglehold. And yet, a part of me couldn't shake the nagging sense of obligation, the need to administer one final righteous act of defiance before fleeing into the great unknown. It was during one of my covert recording sessions that the answer revealed itself. Franklin's very words providing the cosmic green light I had been seeking. Told Henderson we'd have those shipments mislabeled and across the border by Friday, he grumbled to Louise in the study one evening. That money launderer better hold up his end of the bargain this time. Money laundering and smuggling, the illegal dealings Leo had forewarned me about, now confirmed in high-definition audio quality. My chest tightened with perverse validation. This was it, the damning evidence that could bring their empire crumbling down around their rotten cores. Although delivering this recording to the authorities risked exposing my own culpability, the temptation to rain righteous fury upon their deceitful heads proved too delicious to resist. The day before our scheduled departure, with our falsified documents and new lives prepped for Denver, I decided to enact my parting salvo. As Mitchell and his simpering parents gathered to watch another mind-numbing sitcom rerun, I slipped the recording onto an unmarked disc and mailed it with an anonymous tip. My heart hammered as I sealed the envelope, half expecting Franklin to somehow sniff out my act of rebellion and retaliate. But the night passed like any other, filled with their meaningless droning and self-congratulatory posturing. Ella and I made our move the following morning, both of us dragging lightly packed luggage towards the awaiting taxi. Franklin and Louise were conveniently detained at some charity brunch, while Mitchell had already departed for the office. I steeled myself as I turned towards the home that had been my gilded prison for over a decade and a half, fighting back the urge to spit venom in its direction. Instead, I allowed the faintest hint of a smile to grace my lips as one fleeting thought carried me forward. Enjoy the reckoning, you bastards. The voyage to Denver passed in a dreamlike trance of giddy liberation. Gone were the weighted stares and snide remarks, replaced by the purifying vistas of a new frontier blurring past the taxi's windows. It was here, in a picturesque downtown loft that Leo had arranged for us, that the first reports began trickling in. Speculative mumblings online of Mitchell's family business being raided by federal agents. Allegations of fraud and financial improprieties. Each refresh of my burner phone's browser revealed further details of the proverbial House of Cards collapse. Overseas accounts seized, assets frozen, the entire rotten family in for questioning amidst a sordid firestorm of scandal. I absorbed it all with a heady mix of savage satisfaction and deeply rooted melancholy. As much as I had longed for this karmic reckoning, a small part of my heart ached for the good man Mitchell once was before becoming completely ensconced in his family's depravity. But that man was long dead now, replaced by a shell of obedient compliance. I had done what was necessary to save myself, and more importantly, to preserve Ella's innocence from their corruptive grasp. As the first traces of a Rocky Mountain sunset bled through our loft's picture windows, I felt Ella's small hand slipping into my own. Her warm smile was the reassuring balm I needed in that moment. "It's going to be okay now, isn't it, Mom?" I pulled her close, planting a tender kiss on her forehead as I committed to the words that would steer us forward into this new beginning. "Yes, my sweet girl. From now on, everything is going to be okay." The images flooded the news cycle in the days that followed. A disgraceful parade of perp walks and mugshots featuring Franklin, Louise, and their once illustrious family of criminal associates. Seeing those smug, condescending faces twisted into masks of abject humiliation filled me with a nauseating sense of gratification. The mighty patriarchs had fallen, brought low by the very greed and egomania that had fueled their toxic empire. They were finished, their hollow legacy cratering into a scorched pit of legal ruin and insolvency. A chapter of our lives that had once seemed inescapable was now drawing to a brutal, definitive close. My burner phone rang incessantly those first few weeks, Mitchell's number flashing across the screen like a deranged stalker. I never answered, of course. What could he possibly say to excuse his willing complicity in their depravity? To make amends for the years of emotional and psychological torment he enabled? No, the Mitchell I had loved was gone, forever sullied by an obsession with status and his family's perverse value system. He had made his bed, soiling the once pristine sheets with greed and moral bankruptcy. Now he could lie in it. The media fanfare surrounding the case was insatiable. Every tawdry detail, every allegation of financial chicanery splashed across the front pages in grandiose headlines: "Empire of Deceit, Family Business Revealed as Criminal Front." A part of me couldn't help but revel in the shameless rubbernecking. These were the very same high society elites who had once revered Franklin and his brood, suckling from the teat of their ill-gotten riches and high-minded heirs. Now those same sycophantic leeches were lining up for a front-row seat to this grotesque public lynching. Through it all, Ella remained my unshakable pillar of strength and clarity. While the news broadcasts recounted each sordid revelation with rabid indignation, her gentle hand would find mine, calming eyes reminding me of what truly mattered. We were free from their venomous clutches, the scourge of their poisonous influence exorcised by the brilliant light of justice. In time, even my own name would occasionally slip into the news cycle, comment sections speculating about the disillusioned wife who had finally had enough, who brought the whole rickety facade tumbling down. Each mention sparked a defiant fire within me, emboldening my sense of righteousness in the face of those who still sought to cast aspersions. They didn't see me as a victim who escaped, who reclaimed her autonomy by whatever means were available. No, in their privileged eyes I was simply another pariah to condemn, a filthy rat who had abandoned the sinking ship of family values and reputation maintenance. but I didn't need their hollow approval or shallow acceptance any longer. Those days of deference were buried, replaced by an awakened sense of purpose instilled by the mere act of perseverance. When the smoke finally cleared, our fractured little family would emerge from the rubble, hardened but victorious. And emerge we did. First in a modest 2-bedroom flat near Leo's design firm, then slowly blossoming into an idyllic new life as the court-appointed restitution checks began to roll in. With each deposit, I could sense Ella's spirit elevating, her once dimmed sparkle reigniting in the warm glow of our freedom. We were more than survivors. We were the rising phoenix, scorched wings spreading wide to embrace a vibrant new reality far removed from that warped paradigm. No longer bound by poisonous pedigree or archaic patriarchal values, our truth finally unfurled for the world to witness. The apple never fell far from the tree after all. Sometimes they simply chose to forge a brand new orchard of their own making. The years melted away in a surreal blur of newfound tranquility and hard-earned growth. As Mitchell's family circus careened further into legal purgatory, Ella and I steadily rebuilt our lives from those traumatic rubble heaps. Denver proved to be the dream reboot we had so desperately craved, a world away from the suffocating toxicity of our former existence. Leo's design agency was a welcoming haven, the creative team treating me like a long-lost comrade rather than an outcast pariah. It was there, developing cutting-edge ad campaigns in a nurturing environment, that I finally rediscovered the spark that had set my soul afire all those years ago. The passion, the drive, the addictive thrill of visual storytelling, it all came roaring back with amplified intensity. While I thrived professionally, Ella's own transformation left me in awestruck admiration. The once shy, withdrawn young girl had blossomed into a confident, brilliant young woman, top of her class and already fielding inquiries from elite universities across the country. Our cozy 2-bedroom flat, a humble refuge in those shaky early days, steadily gave way to an airy downtown loft, teeming with contemporary furnishings and Ella's vibrant artwork adorning the exposed brick walls. A canvas of her own reinvention, a physical manifestation of how far we had come. Holidays and special occasions, once tainted by Franklin's looming specter of scorn, became cherished celebrations sans judgment or archaic expectations. Blissfully ordinary rituals like baking pies for Thanksgiving or stringing up twinkling lights for Christmas filled our beings with joy rather than dread. At last we were beholden only to our own values, our own visions of what constituted a life well lived. No more pandering to hollow ideals or self-righteous blowhards obsessed with appearances over human dignity. Of course, the legal maelstrom endured like a nagging pop-up ad you could never quite close. Depositions and court dates, investment account audits, and impassioned victim statements. It seemed there was no end to the punitive wrangling over Mitchell's family's illegally acquired holdings and business entities. Through it all, I steadfastly refused to let the toxicity seep back into our reclaimed serenity. Gone were the days of bending to their antiquated will, of allowing them to extort my happiness and autonomy. Ella was my singularly empowering force now, her dazzling smile and academic accolades the only lingering proof I required of our profound metamorphosis. Then came the day I'll never forget. Ella's high school graduation party in our open-air loft, surrounded by Leo and her beaming new social circle of creatives and young progressives. A joyous kaleidoscope of positive energy in sharp contrast to the grotesque farce of that Aunt Kathy gala years prior. I watched my daughter mingle and exude self-assured warmth with a surreal sense of catharsis and validation. This beaming aura of confidence and freedom, with not a trace of familial anguish to restrain her effervescent spirit, it was more than I could have ever dreamed for her. In that moment, as the celebratory chatter echoed through our vibrant living space, I finally exhaled the last lingering twinges of psychological shrapnel. The looking glass had rematerialized into a shining reflection of succor and empowered rebirth, our journey from subjugation to self-actualization solidifying into an unblemished truth. Those reconstructive years had molded us into modern warriors, philosophers of the human condition emerging from the fires of domestic purgatory, tempered by the flames, yet nor vindicated by the righteous path we had chosen to carve through the shadows of oppression. And as Ella embraced me with glistening eyes and a radiant smile, I knew our next chapter was only just beginning to unfurl its magnificent wings. Even after 10 years, Loretta's voice still had the power to make the room feel colder. "Mara, darling, is that you?" The familiar, crisp tone sliced through the chatter of the salon, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to face my former mother-in-law, her perfectly coiffed hair and tailored suit, a jarring contrast to the casual atmosphere. "Loretta," I managed, my throat tightening. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes narrowed, scanning me with disdain. "Is that any way to greet family? Especially after all this time?" She pursed her lips, ignoring the curious stares from the other stylists and clients. I fought the urge to recoil, steadying my voice. "We both know you never considered me family." Loretta waved a dismissive hand. "Water under the bridge, my dear. I'm actually here because I need your help." Her gaze flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "It's about Eli." My ex-husband's name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade, not since Loretta orchestrated our bitter separation shortly after Avery's birth, cutting me off from my own daughter. "You have some nerve," I said through gritted teeth. "After everything you put me through, everything you cost me." "Please, Mara." Loretta's tone softened, but her eyes remained steely. "This isn't about the past, it's about Avery." My heart clenched at the mention of my little girl, now a young woman I barely knew thanks to Loretta's machinations. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. Loretta leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Eli's in trouble, deeper than I can handle alone, and my health." She trailed off, a rare vulnerability flickering across her features. I studied her for a long moment, 1,000 memories and recriminations swirling in my mind. Part of me wanted to turn away, to sever the last thread tying me to that toxic family. But the thought of Avery, caught in the crossfire of whatever drama Loretta had woven, tugged at my heart. Finally, I exhaled a long breath. "All right, Loretta, I'll hear you out, but I'm not making any promises." A ghost of a smile played across her lips, and for a fleeting instant I saw the same calculating glint that had haunted me for years. "Of course, dear. That's all I ask." As Loretta slid into the chair across from me at the cafe, I steeled myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table, a nervous tic I recognized from our past encounters. "I don't have much time to mince words, Mara," she began, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial tone. "Eli's in deep trouble, and it's all my fault." I tensed at the mention of my ex-husband's name, memories of our toxic marriage flooding back. "What did you do this time, Loretta?" She bristled at my accusatory tone. "Don't take that tone with me, young lady. I'm trying to make things right." Her brow furrowed, and for a moment she looked every bit her age. "Eli's gambling addiction has spiraled out of control. He's racked up debts with some unsavory characters, and they're threatening to come after Avery if he doesn't pay up." A chill ran down my spine. My own daughter, caught up in the mess Loretta had created. Why should I believe a word you say? I shot back, my voice sharpened by years of pent-up anger. "You've done nothing but manipulate and lie since the day we met." Loretta recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "You think I wanted any of this?" she hissed. "I tried to mold him into the man this family needed, but he was weak, just like his father. This is the price of my failure as a mother." I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Failure as a mother? You drove a wedge between us from the start, Loretta. You never gave our marriage a chance because you couldn't stand the thought of not being in control." Her eyes flashed with fury, but she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. In that moment, I saw the truth laid bare. Her selfish need for power had destroyed not just my life, but her own son's as well. "You threw me out when I needed family the most," I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "What could you possibly want now?" Loretta's gaze dropped, and for a long moment she said nothing. Finally, she met my eyes, her own brimming with unshed tears. "I want to make it right, Mara, for Avery's sake, if nothing else." I studied her closely, searching for any hint of deception, but behind the poise and arrogance, I saw only a broken woman, grasping at one last chance to salvage something from the wreckage she'd created. "What did you have in mind?" I asked cautiously, silently bracing myself for whatever new manipulation she had up her sleeve. Loretta took a deep breath, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tabletop. "I want you to come live with us, Mara. Be the stabilizing force Eli and Avery so desperately need. I nearly choked on my coffee. You can't be serious, I sputtered. After everything you've done, you expect me to just waltz back into that toxic environment? Do you think this is easy for me? Loretta snapped, her composure slipping. Swallowing my pride and asking for your help? But Eli's spiraling, and I'm not getting any younger. If he keeps going down this path, my entire legacy could be squandered. I shook my head in disbelief. Of course, it all came back to her precious legacy and control over the family fortune. Your greed is what got us into this mess in the first place, Loretta. Why should I trust you now? She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that gave me pause. Because for once, my interests align with yours. We both want what's best for Avery. My breath caught in my throat at the mention of my daughter's name. It had been nearly a decade since I'd last seen her, just a young girl ripped from my arms by Loretta's manipulations. The thought of being reunited with her, of protecting her from the chaos Eli had created, tugged at my heart. You'll have a chance to make things right, Loretta pressed on, sensing my hesitation. To be the mother you always wanted to be, isn't that worth taking a chance? I searched her face for any hint of deception, but her expression remained earnest. Or was I just seeing what I wanted to see, falling for her lies once again? All right, I said slowly, my mouth suddenly dry. I'll do it, but not for you, Loretta, for Avery. A satisfied smile crept across her lips. Of course, dear, whatever you say. As she rose to leave, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was walking into yet another trap, one expertly laid by the master manipulator herself. But the prospect of reconnecting with my daughter, of offering her the stability and love I'd been denied, outweighed my misgivings. He's ruined, Mara, Loretta said, her voice low and urgent. If not for him, do it for Avery. And with those parting words, she was gone, leaving me to wrestle with the weight of my decision and the sinking suspicion that I was merely a pawn in her latest game. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. The lines on my face seemed deeper, etched by years of heartache and loneliness. Was I really considering walking back into the lion's den, putting myself at Loretta's mercy once again? A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Come in, I called out, turning to see Grace letting herself in, a concerned look on her face. You've been awfully quiet since our lunch the other day, she said, taking a seat on the couch. What's going on in that head of yours? I sighed, sinking down next to her. Grace had been my rock through the darkest days, holding me together when Loretta's machinations threatened to tear me apart. If anyone could help me make sense of this tangled mess, it was her. Loretta wants me to move back in, I confessed, the words feeling surreal as they left my lips, to help with Eli and Avery. Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. After everything she put you through? Mara, you can't seriously be considering this. I have to at least try, Grace, I insisted, my voice thick with emotion. Avery is caught in the middle of their dysfunction, and I owe it to her to be there. Grace reached out, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. But at what cost to yourself? That woman nearly destroyed you once. Who's to say she won't try again? Her words struck a chord, dredging up memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The constant belittling and manipulation, the emotional abuse that had left me a hollow shell of my former self, all orchestrated by Loretta's cruel hand. You're right, I whispered, blinking back tears. She's a viper, and I'd be a fool to trust her again. Grace pulled me into a comforting embrace, and for a moment I allowed myself to be enveloped in her warmth and support. Maybe it's not about giving them a second chance, she said gently, pulling back to meet my gaze, but about giving yourself one. Her words hung in the air, their weight slowly sinking in. For years, I'd been defined by my past, by the pain and rejection Loretta had inflicted upon me. But what if this was an opportunity to reshape my narrative, to confront those demons head-on and reclaim the life I deserved? You're right, I said, feeling a newfound resolve stirring within me. It's time I stopped running from my past and faced it head-on. Grace beamed, giving my shoulder an affectionate squeeze. That's my girl. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get hurt again. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Don't worry, I've got this. It's time to show Loretta that she doesn't hold all the cards anymore. As I spoke the words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a steely determination. No more hiding, no more running. This time I would face my demons on my own terms and emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The imposing wrought iron gates of the Blackwood estate loomed before me, their intricate patterns casting eerie shadows in the fading light. Taking a deep breath, I steeled my resolve and pressed the call button on the intercom. "State your business." A gruff voice barked through the speaker. "It's Mara," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. "Loretta is expecting me." There was a momentary pause, then a harsh buzz as the gate swung open with a groan of protest. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, willing my hands to stop shaking as I guided my car up the winding driveway. The sprawling mansion looked just as I remembered, cold, imposing, every inch a monument to Loretta's wealth and status. I cut the engine, the silence pressing in around me like a vice. "You've got this," I muttered under my breath, grabbing my bag from the passenger seat. Time to face the demons. The heavy oak door swung open before I could knock, and there stood Loretta, perfectly coiffed as ever, regarding me with a critical eye. "You're late," she said by way of greeting, her tone clipped. "I expected more punctuality from you, Mara." I bristled at her condescending tone, but bit back the retort on the tip of my tongue. "My apologies. Traffic was heavier than I anticipated." Loretta pursed her lips, clearly unimpressed with my excuse. "Well, come in then. No sense standing out in the cold." I followed her into the cavernous foyer, my eyes adjusting to the dim lighting and hushed atmosphere. Not a single thing had changed. The same antique furniture, the same austere decor, the same oppressive air of joyless affluence. "This house hasn't changed," I remarked, unable to contain the edge of bitterness in my voice. "Cold and full of secrets, just like its owner." Loretta whirled on me, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Mind your tongue, Mara," she hissed. "You're here on my terms, remember?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps on the marble staircase drew our attention. My breath caught in my throat as a young woman descended, her features achingly familiar. "Avery," I whispered, drinking in the sight of my daughter, now a beautiful young woman of 18. She paused on the landing, her eyes narrowing as she studied me with guarded curiosity. "So you're the one Gran's been going on about," she said, her tone laced with skepticism. "The big solution to all our problems." Before I could reply, another figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Eli. My ex-husband looked haggard and worn, his eyes rimmed with dark circles and his clothes rumpled. He regarded me with a mixture of surprise and wariness, as though I were a ghost from another life. "Well, well," he muttered, descending the stairs to stand beside Avery. "If it isn't the prodigal wife returning." Acid rose in my throat as I struggled to maintain my composure in the face of their blatant hostility. Squaring my shoulders, I met Eli's gaze head-on. "I'm not here for you," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I'm here for Avery, to try and undo the damage you've clearly inflicted on her life." Eli recoiled as if I'd struck him, while Avery's eyes widened fractionally. Loretta cleared her throat, stepping between us with a tight smile plastered across her face. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," she chided, resting a hand on Avery's shoulder in a gesture that seemed almost possessive. "We're all family here, are we not?" Her words rang hollow, the false veneer of civility doing little to mask the undercurrent of tension crackling through the air. As I looked from Eli's broken form to Avery's guarded expression, I knew in that moment that Loretta had bulk. Well, truly met her match. This was going to be a battle, and I had every intention of emerging victorious, no matter what it took. The days that followed were a tense dance of forced civility and thinly veiled hostility. Eli avoided me like the plague, while Avery regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, clearly unsure what to make of this sudden reappearance in her life. Loretta, ever the consummate hostess, maintained a facade of familial harmony, but I could see the cracks in her composure growing wider with each passing day. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and I knew better than to let my guard down. It all came to a head one evening as I was making my way to the kitchen for a late-night cup of tea. As I passed Loretta's study, the soft glow of a lamp caught my eye, along with the unmistakable sounds of shuffling papers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself drawn to the slightly ajar door. Peering through the gap, I saw Loretta hunched over her desk, a frown creasing her brow as she pored over what appeared to be legal documents. "This has to be airtight," she muttered to herself, scribbling furiously. No room for error. I leaned closer, straining to make out the words on the pages before her. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the words "Last Will and Testament" emblazoned across the top. Of course. It all made sense now. Loretta's sudden invitation, her insistence on having me under her roof once more. This was never about reconciliation or righting past wrongs. It was about securing her wealth, using me as a pawn to control Avery's future. White-hot anger surged through me as the pieces fell into place. Loretta was up to her old tricks, manipulating everyone around her like marionettes on a string. Well, not this time. I'd been fooled once, but never again. Before I could stop myself, I pushed open the door and strode into the study, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Loretta's head snapped up, her eyes widening in surprise and alarm. "Mara, what are you doing in here?" "Cut the act, Loretta," I spat, snatching the papers from her desk and waving them in her face. "I know what game you're playing." Her expression hardened, the mask of false civility slipping away to reveal the cold, calculating woman I knew so well. "So you figured it out, have you?" she sneered. "Took you long enough." "It was never about redemption," I accused, my voice trembling with fury. "It was always about control, using me to keep a leash on Avery, just like you tried to do with me all those years ago." Loretta rose from her chair, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Oh, Mara, always so naive, even after all this time." She tutted softly, shaking her head. "Did you really think I'd let some washed-up hairstylist waltz back into my family and undo everything I've built? This is about preserving my legacy, and if you can't see that, then you're even more foolish than I thought." I recoiled as if she'd struck me, her words cutting deeper than any physical blow. In that moment, I saw the true depths of her depravity, the lengths she would go to maintain her iron grip on our lives. "You're a monster, Loretta," I whispered, hot tears stinging my eyes, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about you." Her laughter was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and mocking. "Go ahead and try, dear. Who do you think they'll believe, me or the bitter ex-wife with a grudge?" As she spoke those words, I knew she was right. Loretta had spent years cultivating her image, weaving an intricate web of lies and deceit, but this time I had proof of her true nature, tangible evidence of her manipulation. Squaring my shoulders, I met her gaze with newfound resolve. "We'll see about that, Loretta. This isn't over, not by a long shot." With the documents clutched tightly in my hand, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the study, my mind already whirring with plans for how to expose Loretta's true colors to the world. The battle lines had been drawn, and this time I had no intention of losing. The tension was palpable as Loretta's extended family gathered for her annual summer garden party. Elegantly dressed guests milled about the perfectly manicured grounds, sipping champagne and exchanging polite small talk while a string quartet provided a refined backdrop. I lingered near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of lemonade and scanning the crowd for any sign of Avery. If I was going to expose Loretta's machinations, I needed her granddaughter on my side. "There you are." Loretta's saccharine voice cut through the din as she materialized at my elbow, her perfectly coiffed hair and impeccable pearl ensemble a sharp contrast to the fire burning in her eyes. "I was beginning to think you'd skipped out on us and missed the chance to spend quality time with my favorite family," I countered, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Perish the thought." She fixed me with a withering glare. "Watch your tone, Mara. We have appearances to maintain." "Is that all you care about?" I shot back, unable to contain my mounting frustration. "Keeping up your pristine image while you manipulate everyone around you like puppets?" Loretta's perfectly sculpted features contorted with rage, her mask of gentility slipping. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she hissed, leaning in close. "After everything I've done for you, ungrateful wretch." "Done for me?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean like driving a wedge between me and my own daughter? Or using me as some pawn in your twisted game to control Avery's inheritance?" Her eyes widened fractionally, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Before she could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. "Gran, everything okay over here?" Avery approached us, her brow furrowed with concern as she took in the palpable tension between Loretta and me. Loretta immediately plastered on a sickly sweet smile. "Of course, darling. Your grandmother and I were just catching up." I couldn't resist the urge to scoff audibly, drawing Avery's curious gaze. Seizing the opportunity, I pressed on, heedless of Loretta's furious glare. "Your grandmother's been keeping secrets from you, Avery," I said, my voice low and intense, "about her real reasons for bringing me back into this family." Avery's eyes flicked uncertainly between us as Loretta spluttered indignantly. "Don't listen to her lies, sweetheart. She's clearly unwell." But I was on a roll now, propelled by years of pent-up anger and resentment. Fishing the crumpled legal documents from my pocket, I thrust them toward Avery. "See for yourself. She's been plotting to use you to control your inheritance and keep her grubby hands on the family fortune." I turned to Loretta, my gaze blazing with righteous fury. "You used everyone as your pawns, Loretta, but this is where it ends." A hush fell over the gathering as heads turned in our direction, drawn by the commotion. Loretta's face drained of color, her perfectly composed veneer cracking to reveal the ugliness lurking beneath. Avery stared at the documents in her hands, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization as the truth sank in. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Loretta's, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Is it true, Gran?" she asked, her voice small and tremulous. "Have you been lying to me this whole time?" For a long, agonizing moment, Loretta said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Then, with a sigh of resignation, she gave a curt nod. "I did what I had to do," she said stiffly, "to protect our legacy, our family name." Avery recoiled as if struck, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're unbelievable," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "All this time I thought—" Her words trailed off as she turned toward me, a silent apology in her eyes. In that moment, I knew I'd won. Not just the battle against Loretta's manipulations, but Avery's trust as well. As the gathering dissolved into hushed whispers and furtive glances, Loretta stood alone, her meticulously constructed facade in ruins around her. The master puppeteer at last unmasked. The gentle tinkle of the bell above the door mingled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of conversation. I took a moment to savor the warmth and energy of the bustling salon, a contented smile tugging at my lips. "Order up for table 4. Avery's voice rang out from the small kitchen area, drawing a chorus of laughter from the group of regulars gathered around one of the cozy bistro tables. It had been 6 months since that fateful evening, when the truth about Loretta's schemes finally came to light. In the aftermath, everything had unraveled with startling swiftness. The strained relationships within the family, the tightly guarded web of control Loretta had so carefully constructed, all of it crumbling like a house of cards. Avery had been my fiercest ally throughout, standing by my side as I navigated the messy legal battles and bitter recriminations that followed. With her support, I'd finally been able to extract myself from the toxic grip of Loretta's influence, emerging stronger and more determined than ever before. And now, here we were, partners in more than just name, having pooled our resources to open this quaint little salon and cafe, a cozy oasis worlds away from the cold opulence of the Blackwood estate. "Incoming!" Avery called out in mock warning as she deposited a tray, laden with steaming mugs and pastries on the table, to a round of cheery thanks. I watched her work the room with a natural grace and warmth, effortlessly charming the customers as she topped up coffees and swapped friendly banter. In those unguarded moments, I could see so much of myself in her. The same resilient spirit, the same quiet determination that had carried me through the darkest days of my divorce and estrangement. "We're not just rebuilding our lives, Avery," I murmured, catching her eye as she circled back toward the counter. "We're reclaiming them." She flashed me a conspiratorial grin, sliding an arm around my shoulders in a quick, affectionate squeeze. "You got that right. No more letting other people dictate our story." Her words struck a chord deep within me, a poignant reminder of just how far we'd come. For so long, I'd allowed Loretta's toxicity and manipulation to define my narrative, to strip away my autonomy and sense of self-worth. But not anymore. This salon, this vibrant hub of warmth and community, was a living testament to our perseverance, a reclamation of the life I'd always envisioned for myself and my daughter. A life free from the shadows of bitterness and control that had loomed over us for far too long. As the afternoon stretched on, and the hum of lively conversation and laughter filled the air, I found myself stealing furtive glances at the framed newspaper clipping mounted proudly on the wall. The bold headline, "Family Feud Erupts, Blackwood Empire in Turmoil," felt like a relic from another lifetime, a stark reminder of just how far we'd come. Loretta's once formidable influence had withered in the wake of her exposed machinations, leaving her isolated and diminished, a specter of her former self. The vast fortune and legacy she'd safeguarded so ruthlessly had slipped through her grasping fingers, a fitting cosmic comeuppance for the suffering she'd inflicted. But dwelling on her downfall brought me no satisfaction, no sense of victory or revenge. As I surveyed the cozy warmth of the salon, my gaze settling on Avery's radiant smile, I realized that this, the hard-won bond between mother and daughter, the freedom to forge our own path, was the greatest triumph of all. No more pawns in someone else's game, no more victims of manipulation and control. Just two women, boldly authoring the next chapter of their lives on their own terms. And in that moment, awash in the contentment and possibility that surrounded us, I knew our story was just beginning. The incessant pounding at the door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock. 11:37 p.m. Fear crept in as I clutched my robe, tiptoeing down the stairs. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Grandma, it's us! Please open up!" Two small voices pierced through the howling wind and pelting rain. I swung the door open to find my grandsons, Alex and Caleb, drenched and shivering on my doorstep. Caleb clung to a crumpled piece of paper in his tiny fist. "Boys? What on earth?" My words caught in my throat as I ushered them inside, wrapping them in thick towels. "Mom, she left us at the park," Alex said between chattering teeth. "She told us to come here." Caleb shakily held up the note. "Read it, Grandma." My hands trembled as I smoothed out the soggy paper. 5 scrawled words made my heart plummet. "Take them to Grandma's house." Jenna's looping cursive mocked me from the page. How could she abandon her own children like this? "I'm so sorry, boys," I whispered, pulling them into a fierce embrace. Caleb's little body shook with sobs. "You're safe now. I've got you." I marched them upstairs, bundling them into warm pajamas. Haunted eyes followed my every move as they huddled on the guest bed. "Will Mom come back for us?" Caleb asked, his voice tiny and fragile. I froze, unsure how to respond. After everything she'd put them through, would Jenna really want them back? Swallowing hard, I gently brushed Caleb's damp curls from his forehead. "We'll figure this out tomorrow. Tonight, you just need to rest." Alex remained stoic, clenching his jaw to mask the fear flickering in his eyes. At 10 years old, he tried so hard to be the brave one. As I settled into the armchair beside their bed, their shuddering breaths slowed into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Yet haunting questions whirled in my mind, dark memories stirring. My relationship with Jenna had been fraught from the beginning. The sweet, loving girl my son Derek fell for vanished after their wedding, replaced by someone manipulative and cold-hearted. Still, she was their mother. What desperation could drive a parent to abandon their own flesh and blood? A gnawing suspicion took root. This was about more than just bad parenting. Staring at my grandson's sleeping forms, their cheeks still glistening with drying tears, a fierce protectiveness burned within me. I would get to the bottom of Jenna's deceit, whatever it took. For now they were home, they were safe, and I would do everything in my power to ensure it stayed that way. As the first pale rays peeked through the curtains, I allowed my eyes to drift shut, steeling myself for the maelstrom ahead. The shrill trill of the phone jolted me awake at the crack of dawn. I immediately tensed, scanning the bed. Relief washed over me as I saw Alex and Caleb huddled together, still slumbering peacefully. "Hello?" I whispered, padding out of the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Sheriff Davis. We received a troubling report last night from a family at Oak Ridge Park." My stomach twisted into knots as the sheriff proceeded to recount how a hysterical Jenna had shown up in the middle of the night, rambling about voices telling her to hurt the boys. She'd fled before the cops arrived, leaving Alex and Caleb alone on a rain-soaked park bench. "We've been searching all night, but there's no sign of her." His gruff voice softened. "I know you two had your differences, but are the boys safe with you?" Squeezing my eyes shut, I managed a tight nod before realizing he couldn't see me. Yes, they're here, safe and sound. After ending the call, my hands trembled as I glimpsed the shredded remnants of my tranquil retired life around me. How could Jenna put her own sons through such trauma? I hurried back to the bedroom, my heart clenching at the sight of them cuddled together like orphaned kittens. Jenna's depraved actions were utterly unforgivable, but what terrified me most was the possibility of far deeper depravities lurking beneath the surface. Voices telling her to hurt them, or her own twisted thoughts whirling out of control. Over the next few days, I discreetly made inquiries around town, desperate for any clues that could shed light on the dark path Jenna had ventured down. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. She's lost her mind, plain and simple. Derek's old friend Mitch grimly told me one afternoon while I had the boys occupied playing in the backyard. Got mixed up with some real nasty people, from what I gathered. My heart pounded as Mitch detailed rumors of shady business deals, illicit money trails, and unsettling new acquaintances in Jenna's life. They're saying she did things, illegal things, to keep the cash flowing after Derek. He shook his grizzled head sadly. After Derek's death in that horrific car crash 6 months ago, Jenna had rapidly changed, staying out at all hours, dressing in ostentatious new clothes, and lavishly showering the boys with toys and gifts she couldn't afford on a widow's pension. The picture grew exponentially uglier the more I unearthed. Theft, embezzlement, fraud, no depravity seemed off-limits in Jenna's warped quest for wealth and status. And at the center of this web of lies and immorality were my beloved grandsons, forced to fend for themselves as collateral damage while their own mother indulged her demons. One night after the boys were tucked in, I stood at the bay window, staring out at the inky darkness. "I will burn it all down to ashes if I have to," I murmured in a voice that chilled even me. "She won't go unpunished for this, not on my watch." The wheels were in motion to expose the full extent of Jenna's deception. I could only pray I wasn't too late to protect Alex and Caleb from the worst of the fallout. The rusty hinges of the attic door protested as I pulled it down, thick dust motes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I couldn't recall the last time I'd ventured up here. After Derek's passing, any reminders were too agonizing. But to have a prayer of protecting Alex and Caleb from Jenna's toxicity, I needed to understand how we'd arrived at this catastrophic juncture. So I steeled myself and climbed the creaky ladder. Coughing through the musty air, I aimed my light across a maze of boxes and trunks packed with decades of memories. My gaze snagged on a crooked stack of faded photo albums. With a lump in my throat, I sank onto the dusty floor, pulling them into my lap one by one. Smiling faces of happier times beamed back at me. An 8-year-old Derek, freckles dancing across his nose as he grinned at the camera on his Little League baseball team's picture day. High school graduation, his lanky frame dwarfing that ridiculous maroon cap and gown. Our tight-knit trio on my front porch after he'd moved into his first college dorm room, already looking so grown up. My chest ached as I drank in every moment, unable to fathom how that sweet, vibrant boy had become the haggard, haunted man who ultimately couldn't outrun his demons. Then the photos shifted. Derek's energetic smile remained, but his arm was slung around a pretty blonde girl with an equally megawatt grin. Jenna. I'll never forget the day he arrived home from university on Christmas break, hands trembling with poorly disguised excitement as he introduced us to his new girlfriend. How her dimpled cheeks and sparkling eyes instantly camouflaged the punkish, asymmetrical haircut and bare midriff that made me inwardly cringe. "She's the one, Mom." Derek had whispered to me in the kitchen that night as she dazzled my husband with some anecdote about hitchhiking through Amsterdam one summer. I know it seems crazy since we've only been dating for a few months, but she's my soulmate. Part of me wanted to bundle him back into his Star Wars sheets from childhood and never let him go. But I couldn't ignore the sheer incandescence radiating from my typically brooding son. So I smiled and welcomed Jenna into our family with open arms. How I lived to regret that decision. The subsequent albums told a heartbreaking tale, one of increasing loneliness on Derek's face as the wattage on Jenna's dimmed through their wedding portraits and into the first couple years of their marriage. Finally, I flipped to the last few pages and recoiled. Here were my grandsons, capturing in wide grins and crinkled nose giggles. But the woman beside them was utterly unrecognizable. Cold, hollow eyes bored into the camera. Painted smiles slashed across her taut face with all the authenticity of a circus clown. Where had my sweet, goofy Jenna gone? The one who taught me how to twerk at their engagement party? The girl who threatened to burn her eyebrows off while helping me make adorable, succulent pumpkin centerpieces for their fall wedding? Slapping the album shut, I shuddered as the revelations washed over me. Jenna's betrayal of Derek ran even deeper than I could have imagined. She'd sucked the very light and joy from his spirit long before his tragic demise last year. I swiped at the heated tears streaking my cheeks as a grim calm settled over me. Whatever drove Jenna to her current depths of immorality, her own children would not be her next victims. Not if I had any say in the matter. "This is ridiculous. You can't keep my children from me." Jenna's shrill voice sliced through the diner's murmured chatter like fingernails on a chalkboard. I stiffened as she stormed up to our booth, eyes wild and knuckles blanched from clutching her purse strap. Alex and Caleb instantly shrank back against the cracked vinyl seat. Caleb whimpered, and I instinctively tugged them closer under the safety of my arms. "Don't you dare upset them further," I warned in a low tone. "The boys are terrified of you, Jenna, and after what you pulled, can you blame them?" Her lips curled into an ugly sneer. "Oh, so you've turned them against their own mother? That's rich, coming from the woman who poisoned Derek against me for years." I opened my mouth to retort, but she cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Save your breath, Lorraine. I want full custody, effective immediately. If you don't hand them over willingly, I'll take you to court and make you regret the day you ever met me." Shaking her head slowly, she leveled me with a chilling glare. "Mark my words, you won't be able to protect them forever." With that ominous vow hanging in the air, she spun on her spiked heel and stormed out, leaving us all shaken. I clutched the boys tighter, feeling their tiny bodies trembling against mine. They shouldn't have to endure this trauma, not from the person who was supposed to nurture and safeguard them. When we returned home, Sheriff Davis was waiting on the front porch, hands shoved in his pockets. "We finally got to the bottom of what Jenna's been up to," he said grimly, "and it's not good." My heart plummeted as he recounted a twisted web of fraud, theft, and money laundering, all stemming from Jenna's efforts to siphon funds from Derek's life insurance payout after his death. "She set up shell companies, forged documents, you name it," the sheriff said, shaking his grizzled head. "From what we can gather, her crazy behavior was all an act. A way to get the boys out of her hair so she could pull off this whole scam undetected." White-hot fury blazed through me at the thought of her using our sweet grandsons as disposable pawns in her greed-fueled games. I wanted to scream, to hurl plates at the wall, to unleash the pure, primal rage burning in my veins. But I couldn't. Not with those two sets of fearful eyes, watching my every move, clinging to me as their solitary beacon of stability. So I inhaled a slow, steadying breath. Whatever Jenna's motivations, she's proven herself an unfit parent who's put them in danger. I want full legal custody. Relief flickered across the sheriff's face. "I'll make sure our case against her is airtight. You just focus on taking care of those boys." He started toward his cruiser, then paused. "And Lorraine, if she tries anything else, you let me know immediately. You hear?" I offered a terse nod, then scooped Alex and Caleb into my arms, their small bodies melting into my embrace like they'd never let go. Jenna could hurl whatever malicious threats she desired. I didn't care about her con artist scheming or her vile machinations to line her pockets with my son's hard-earned money. All I cared about were these two precious souls who had already witnessed and endured far too much in their young lives. They were my entire world now. And if Jenna delusionally thought I'd relinquish them without a brutal fight to the death, she was soon to be rudely awakened. "So you're really going to fight me on this?" Jenna's derisive laugh crackled through the phone line. "You senile old bat. I'll bury you." I clutched the receiver tighter, struggling against the flood of rage testing my restraint. "If you think I'll let you within a mile of those boys after what you've done, you're delirious. We'll see about that." The smug venom in her tone made my skin crawl. "My lawyer is prepping an ironclad case as we speak. You might have been able to manipulate the local cops, but I'd like to see you talk your way out of this in an actual courtroom." The line went dead with an ominous click. I slowly returned the phone to its cradle, steadying my ragged breaths. I'd expected Jenna's threats, expected the nasty accusations and diversionary tactics in a desperate attempt to regain control of her twisted game. But her arrogance made one fatal miscalculation. She had severely underestimated the resolve of a lifelong educator pushed to her limits. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I studied the two tow-headed figures sprawled across the guest bed in a jumble of sheets and gangly limbs. Bruises and scrapes mottled their arms, remnants of being abandoned in the park like unwanted pound puppies. But their cherubic faces were finally relaxed in peaceful slumber, no longer etched with fear and uncertainty. In that moment, I vowed to do whatever was required to preserve this newfound serenity they so desperately craved, which meant playing Jenna's macabre game and beating her at it without hesitation. I strode into the study and booted up my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I toggled between search engine results for top private investigators near me and local family law attorneys with stellar custody case track records. Time was of the essence if I wanted to mount an unshakable offensive before Jenna beat me to the courtroom battlefield. 2 phone calls and a hurried conference later, and I'd assembled an elite cadre of legal warriors ready to dismantle whatever vitriolic crusade Jenna tried to wage. "We're going to rip her facade to shreds from every angle," Annalise, the razor-sharp family law specialist, assured me over steaming mugs of coffee. "Money trails, witness statements, a full forensic analysis of her involvement in your son's death. She won't know what hit her." The other woman, Mei Ling, was one of the area's most sought-after private eyes, having cracked countless high-stakes cases with her enigmatic brand of perception and grit. Her obsidian eyes glinted with determination. "I already have leads indicating Jenna's scam goes far deeper than just fraud. We're talking organized crime rings, money laundering operations spanning multiple states. There's a good chance she had Derek killed to inherit those insurance funds." A collective chill reverberated around the table. I slowly lifted my gaze, feeling their scrutiny. "I don't care what stones need to be upturned or what vermin you need to smoke out," I stated with flinty resolve. That thing is not going to terrorize my grandsons any longer. I want her exposed for the vile, heartless snake she is, and I want those boys to feel safe again." Mei Ling and Annalise exchanged weighted looks before giving terse nods of understanding. We knew the battle lines had been drawn, and all bets were officially off. Jenna wanted to sick her high-priced legal team on me? Let her wage her war. Little did she know I relished the chance to go nuclear if pushed, and I hadn't survived 5 decades as an inner-city educator by playing nice with bullies. The tension in the cramped courthouse conference room was thicker than New England clam chowder. I could barely meet the clouded gazes of the disheveled strangers flanking my sides, members of the jury still reeling from the bombshell revelations. Jenna attempted a sickly sweet smile as she rose from the table, emaciated frame swimming in her designer pantsuit, but the wanton arrogance that usually dripped from her had been extinguished, replaced by the skittish panic of a rat in a trap. I kept my own expression steeled and impassive, fighting against the savage curl of satisfaction in my gut. We weren't quite at checkmate yet. "Let's be reasonable here," she began in that saccharine lilt that used to grate my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "I never meant for things to go this far. You all have to believe I only wanted what was best for my children." Mei Ling made a derisive noise beside me, thumbing through the damning evidence portfolio. Photos of money trails and encrypted communications between Jenna and a notorious cartel kingpin. Ballistics reports tying the revolver used to kill Derek to one of the mobster's henchmen. A chilling CCTV clip capturing Jenna's vehicle leaving the scene of the accident, moments after Derek's truck plunged over the ravine. "Is that so?" Mei Ling arched one sculpted eyebrow. "Because these financial ledgers suggest you spent over $2 million on designer handbags, high-stakes gambling jaunts to Monaco, and a literal palace in the Dominican Republic, all from the insurance payout after murdering your own husband." Jenna's mask faltered, replacing the sugary syrup with a hiss of venom. You self-righteous vultures wouldn't understand. I was trapped in a loveless marriage, taken for granted at every turn. I deserved those things. You deserve to leave your children orphaned and broke? I growled, unable to contain myself any longer. You deserve to slaughter their father, your own flesh and blood, in cold blood? Stay out of this, you cretinous relic, Jenna spat. I had bigger plans, grander wealth waiting on the horizon. Derek was a stepping stone I needed to discard like all the others before him. Besides, it's not like those boys brought anything positive to my life. A collective shudder reverberated around the room. Even Jenna's own attorneys averted their gazes, disgust etched on their craggy faces. Then I guess they dodged a pretty big bullet by winding up with their grandma instead of an egomaniacal sociopath like you, Mei Ling said, chin raised in defiant contempt. Lurching to her feet, Jenna unleashed the full force of her black rage. Nobody was supposed to dig this deep. How dare you interfere with my destiny? Those brats and their pitiful trust fund were just the tip of the iceberg. She wheeled toward me, eyes wild with madness. I hope you're prepared to suffer, Lorraine. Starting with watching your precious grandsons be stripped away once my associates on the outside. The gavel cracked down as a hulking bailiff seized Jenna's flailing arms. That's enough, ma'am. You've already dug your grave deeper than hell itself. In the pandemonium, Annalise discreetly slid her hand over my clenched fist under the table. A small, grim smile tugged at her lips. We got her, she murmured, in front of the entire jury. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering violations, criminal negligence toward minors. The rap sheet goes on and on. By the time we present our closing arguments, she'll be praying to go away for life instead of lethal injection. With dawning realization, I glanced around at the pale, stricken faces of the jurors, middle-class Americans much like myself, looking as if they'd witnessed the devil herself unleashed on their quiet hamlet. Not one semblance of sympathy remained for the raving, unhinged woman being restrained before us. In that surreal moment, the gravity of the victory sank in. My son's legacy had been preserved. My grandchildren had been pried from the clutches of a demonic succubus by the barest margins before it was too late. And the deranged charlatan who almost stole everything from me in her quest for wealth and power would finally be entombed where she belonged, in a cage. As Jenna's unhinged howls receded down the courthouse corridor, I felt the leaden weight of tension slough off my shoulders for the first time in over a year. An era of healing could finally commence. A heavy silence blanketed the courtroom as we reassembled the following day for closing arguments and sentencing. Jenna had been temporarily removed, giving the jurors some respite from her poisonous presence before delivering their verdict. But the tension was still palpable, a suffocating dread that the unthinkable could still transpire and that vile harpy might somehow slither away unscathed. Mei Ling squeezed my arm as we took our places at the prosecution's table. Just a little while longer. Stay strong. I managed a resolute nod, scanning the crowd until my gaze landed on Alex and Caleb flanked by their court-appointed guardian. Their angelic faces were somber, almost sage-like in their premature hardening against the realities they'd been forced to endure. It fortified my resolve to see this malignancy eradicated from their lives once and for all. They deserved the world, warm homes, unconditional love, blissful days of chasing lightning bugs and jumping into leaf piles. Not this paradigm of toxicity and reckless self-interest. The courtroom fell into a hush as the bailiff escorted Jenna inside, her rail-thin wrists encased in shackles. Our eyes bored into one another, hazel meeting ice blue in a silent clash of wills. State your final remarks, the judge intoned, his weary tone betraying the aftershocks of the evidence he'd presented over the last several days. Jenna rose on shaky legs, painted lips pursing into a defiant sneer. I have no final remarks, aside from the fact that this biased, uncultured backwater of a town has no comprehension of the grandeur I was born to achieve. A disgusted titter rippled across the gallery. Jenna's gaze flickered around the room before landing squarely on me, that sneer metastasizing into a look of pure, undiluted hatred. They're my sons, my flesh and blood, not this decrepit harpy's. Yet because of your deranged witch hunt, I've been robbed of my rightful legacy, all for the sake of two ungrateful little bastards who did nothing but hold me back. Her voice rose to a shrill screech, spittle flying. "They don't deserve my fortune or my empire. I hope they rot right alongside you for the rest of their pathetic—" "Miss Mitchell?" The judge's boom reverberated like a shotgun blast, startling Jenna into stunned silence. "I will have order in this court." He turned his withering glare toward the jurors, who flinched collectively. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, as well as the defendant's own admissions of guilt, any further grandstanding is unnecessary. Tugging on the hem of his robe, the judge exhaled a solemn sigh. "Jenna Mitchell, this court finds you guilty beyond all reasonable doubt on all counts, including first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, child endangerment, money laundering, and racketeering. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." An anguished howl spilled from Jenna's twisted lips as the sentence hit home. "No, you can't do this to me. I was destined. I was meant for glory, for opulence." Two burly bailiffs gripped her flailing arms as she fought against their restraints with feral desperation. "Let me go. I won't rot in your cages, you pathetic scum. Alex, Caleb, you were supposed to be my legacy." Our eyes met one final time across the courtroom as she was hauled toward the doors. Ironic, the woman who had sacrificed her own children in pursuit of greatness was now little more than a rabid dog being carted away from polite society. As the doors clanged shut behind her, an eerie silence fell over the room like the aftershock of a bomb blast. We all remained motionless, struggling to process the finality of it. Then, a tiny sound pierced the hush, the muffled sniffle of a child crying. I whipped around to see Caleb burying his face in his guardian's shoulder, whole body shaking with sobs of bewildered relief and anguish. Alex's jaw was set in a rigid line, but crystalline tears streaked down his ashen cheeks. In that moment, my heart both swelled and shattered at once. No child should ever have to witness such depravity, least of all from the person who gave them life. But as I pulled them both into my embrace, permitting myself to finally unleash the torrent I'd pent up for far too long, I swore on my life it was the last trauma they would suffer. From here, their worlds could only grow kinder and brighter. The spacious backyard was bathed in a warm summer glow as the evening shadows lengthened across the grass. Raucous laughter and the crack of baseball against aluminum echoed through the twilight air. "Heads up, Grandma!" I barely had time to glance over my shoulder before the battered softball whistled past my head, Caleb's voice ringing out in a peal of unbridled mirth. Clutching my chest in mock horror, I shook my head at the now 10-year-old cherub barreling toward me. "You rascal! Where did you learn to throw like that?" "From Alex," Caleb proclaimed proudly, puffing out his narrow chest. "He's teaching me all his pitches so I can make the all-star team next year like him." I ruffled his sandy curls, speckled with grass stains and sweat. "Is that so? Well, you two had better work up an appetite for those famous Mitchell family burgers I'm about to fire up." "Yes," Caleb crowed, bounding across the yard to where Alex stood whipping pitches into an ancient catcher's mitt. At 12 years old, he was rapidly morphing into a young man, all knobby wrists and elbows jutting out at haphazard angles, yet the easygoing smile crinkling his eyes kept the last vestiges of boyish innocence intact. For now. As I busied myself stoking the grill, they resumed their impromptu batting practice, periodic whoops piercing the evening calm. Just a couple of rambunctious boys being boys, the way nature intended. Idly flipping the burgers, I couldn't help but gaze at them with a contented sense of pride and reverence. 2 years ago, they had arrived on my doorstep as skittish, traumatized waifs, their childhoods robbed from them by that soulless, vicious monster. But to see them now, shrieking and tussling on the grass with all the wild abandon of kids their age, it was nothing short of a miracle reborn from the ashes. "Grandma?" I glanced up to find them hovering at the edge of the concrete patio, grass stains crisscrossing their knees and T-shirts askew. Caleb fidgeted in that familiar way he did when broaching a sensitive topic. You don't have any other grandkids, do you? Just us?" My breath hitched slightly as I studied their earnest young faces. It was something I'd never pressed them on, not wanting to risk dredging up memories of that shattered former life. "No, honey," I replied gently. "Just my 2 favorite grandsons." Alex scuffed at the patio with his toe, jaw tightening the way it always did when wrestling with something monumental. So you wouldn't mind if we didn't want to go by Mitchell anymore? A pregnant pause stretched between us as my mind whirred, processing the weight of their request. Then Caleb barreled ahead in typical headlong fashion. It's just, you're not like her, Grandma. And that name, it reminds us of all those bad, scary times we want to forget. We want your name instead, to match our real family. His imploring gaze shimmered with unshed tears, and I felt my throat constrict as the profundity of his plea washed over me. In that moment, I saw the depth of their courage shining through. 2 little warriors who had conquered more darkness than men 4 times their age. Clearing my throat, I turned to give Alex, my solemn, sensitive soul, an opportunity to voice what he'd clearly been mustering for a while. He held my gaze steadily. Mitchell was never who we really were anyway. You're all we have, Grandma, and all we'll ever need. The words tumbled out in a childlike rush, but their impact was profound and eternal. A renewal of selfhood, an absolving of the shackles that had bound them to that venomous succubus's legacy. Crossing the patio in 2 strides, I enveloped them in my arms as my own tears finally spilled free. A kaleidoscope of memories ricocheted through me. Motherless childhood, dreams of raising kids in a loving home of my own one day, then the heartsick reality of being alone as an empty nester. Until these 2 battered little souls had resurrected my world from the ashes of despair. And now they were my entire universe. Of course, my sweet boys, I whispered through the thickness gripping my throat. From now on, you'll have the family name you were always meant for. Sutherland. My Sutherland grandsons. Their answering embrace tightened with wordless emotion searing deeper than any dialect. A bygone open wound had finally mended into an unbreakable seal of wholeness. Jenna had gambled everything in pursuit of superficial glory, only to be banished into perpetual insignificance. But I, just an ordinary Midwestern widow, had reclaimed the greatest prize of all. A true, unshakable family, bound by the eternal ties of unconditional love. I stared in disbelief as Tate casually zipped up his suitcase, his nonchalant attitude infuriating me. You can't be serious, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Your mother's condition is critical, and you're just leaving for a business trip? Tate barely glanced up, his cold eyes meeting mine briefly. Hallie, we've been over this. This deal in Florida is too important to pass up. Mom's in good hands at the rehabilitation center. I clenched my fists, struggling to contain my rage. How could he be so callous? For months, I'd been the one visiting Marlene daily, ensuring she received the care and affection she deserved, while he remained consumed by his work. You know she's not just Mom to me, I said, my voice growing louder. She's my family too, and she needs us now more than ever. But you don't seem to care at all. Tate sighed, shouldering his bag. Don't be so dramatic. The doctor said she's stable for now. I'll be back in a week. As he moved past me towards the door, I couldn't stay silent any longer. That's it? That's all you have to say? I shouted, the anger boiling over. You're a selfish, uncaring son, and I'm sick of making excuses for you. Tate paused, his lips curling into a smug smile that only fueled my fury. Careful, Hallie, you're starting to sound like a nagging wife. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I wouldn't stand idly by while he neglected his own mother, the woman who had welcomed me into her family with open arms. As he disappeared out the door, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. Tate would pay for his indifference, one way or another. The seeds of my plan had already begun to take root, fueled by the anger and disappointment I felt towards the man I had once loved. I would make him see the error of his ways, no matter what it took. The rehabilitation center's sterile hallways seemed to stretch endlessly as I made my way to Marlene's room. My anger towards Tate had only intensified since his callous departure, fueling my determination to seek justice for his mother. As I entered the room, Marlene's tired eyes lit up, a warm smile spreading across her face. Hallie, dear, it's so good to see you. I leaned down and gently embraced her, trying to push away the storm of emotions swirling within me. How are you feeling today, Marlene? She let out a soft sigh, her frail hand patting mine. I'm hanging in there, sweetheart. The nurses have been taking good care of me. Guilt tugged at my heart. If only Tate could show a fraction of the care and devotion I felt for this remarkable woman. I forced a smile, determined not to burden her with my troubles. I'm glad to hear that, I said, settling into the chair beside her bed. Have you had any visitors today? Marlene's expression grew somber. No, it's just been me and the nurses. You know how busy Tate is with his work. I bit back a scathing remark, not wanting to upset her further. Instead, I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Don't worry, Marlene. I'm here for you, always. A glimmer of appreciation shone in her eyes, and she nodded gratefully. As our conversation drifted to more light-hearted topics, I found myself distracted by a folder on her bedside table. Curiosity got the better of me, and I discreetly slid it towards me. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the words Last Will and Testament printed on the cover. Without thinking, I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the pages in disbelief. Marlene, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, why does this will state that you're leaving everything to me? She paused, her gaze steady and resolute. Because you've been the one truly caring for me, Hallie, not Tate. Tears stung my eyes as the weight of her words sank in. Marlene trusted me, valued me, in a way her own son didn't. A surge of determination coursed through me. I would make sure Tate paid dearly for his neglect. Thank you, Marlene, I whispered, squeezing her hand tightly. I promise. I'll take care of everything. As I left the center that day, my mind was already whirring with plans. Tate's indifference would be his downfall, and I would stop at nothing to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. In the days following my discovery of Marlene's will, a fire ignited within me, fueling my determination to expose Tate's true nature. I knew I needed irrefutable evidence of his neglect, something that would shatter any illusion of devotion he tried to maintain. The first step was installing hidden cameras in Marlene's room at the rehabilitation center. With the help of a tech-savvy friend, I strategically placed the tiny devices, ensuring they captured every angle. I would document Tate's indifference firsthand. As the days ticked by, the footage painted a damning picture. Tate's visits were few and far between, often lasting mere minutes before he rushed off, citing work commitments. On the rare occasion he did linger, his disinterest was palpable, scrolling through his phone or making hasty exits whenever Marlene attempted conversation. But the true depths of his callousness became apparent during one particularly painful incident. Marlene had fallen ill, her condition deteriorating rapidly. The nurses had called me in a panic, urging me to come quickly. When I arrived, flustered and terrified, I found Marlene writhing in agony, her face contorted in pain. The nurses informed me they had tried contacting Tate repeatedly, but he hadn't answered. Where is he? I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. This is his own mother. The nurse's expression was one of resignation. We haven't been able to reach him, Miss Jensen. He's not answering our calls. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I would make Tate answer for this, no matter what it took. Over the next few weeks, I meticulously gathered testimonies from the nurses and caregivers, documenting every instance of Tate's negligence. Their accounts painted a damning picture, a son so consumed by his own ambitions that he had abandoned his ailing mother. With each new piece of evidence, my resolve only grew stronger. Tate would face the consequences of his actions, even if I had to drag him kicking and screaming into the harsh light of truth. As I reviewed the footage and statements, a plan began to form in my mind, a reckoning that would leave no doubt as to the depths of Tate's indifference, and when the time came, I would be ready to strike. The sharp trill of my phone cut through the silence, and I glanced at the caller ID with a mix of trepidation and hope. It was the rehabilitation center. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for whatever news awaited. Miss Jensen? The nurse's voice was tinged with excitement. You'll never believe it. Marlene's condition has improved dramatically over the past few days. The doctors say her recovery is nothing short of miraculous. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of determination. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for, a chance to make Tate face the consequences of his neglect once and for all. That's wonderful news, I replied, already formulating my plan. When can I bring Marlene home? The nurse's voice brightened. The doctors have given the all clear. She's ready for discharge whenever you're able to pick her up. Perfect. I'll be there as soon as I can. Hanging up the phone, I wasted no time. I gathered the evidence I had meticulously compiled, the damning footage, the nurse's testimonies, every shred of proof of Tate's indifference. With Marlene by my side, we would confront him together, leaving him no room for excuses or lies. When I arrived at the center, Marlene was already waiting in the lobby, her vibrant smile a stark contrast to the frail woman I had grown accustomed to seeing. She embraced me tightly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Hallie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for never giving up on me." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You don't need to thank me, Marlene. I'm just glad you're feeling better." As we made our way to my car, I couldn't help but notice the renewed strength in Marlene's step. It was as if her determination had reignited, fueling her recovery. And in that moment, I knew she was ready to face her son's cruelty head-on. Once we were settled in my apartment, I wasted no time in laying out the evidence I had gathered. Marlene's expression hardened as she watched the footage, her jaw clenching with each new instance of Tate's neglect. "That heartless boy," she muttered, her voice trembling with anger. "How could he treat his own mother this way?" I reached out and clasped her hand in mine, my gaze unwavering. "We're going to make him pay, Marlene, together." A determined glint shone in her eyes, and she nodded resolutely. "Whatever it takes." As we pored over the details of our plan, a sense of righteousness washed over me. Tate had made his choices, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. With Marlene by my side, nothing could stop us from seeking the justice we deserved. With Marlene's recovery progressing remarkably, the time had come to set our plan in motion. We would make Tate answer for his cruelty, exposing his true colors in front of those he respected most. "Are you sure you're up for this, dear?" I asked Marlene as we pored over the guest list. "We can postpone if you need more time." Her steely gaze met mine, resolution etched into every line of her face. "No more delays, Hallie. That boy needs to be taught a lesson, and I intend to be there when he gets it." I nodded, suppressing a smile at her unwavering determination. Together, we finalized the invitations for a family dinner under the guise of celebrating Marlene's miraculous recovery, but our true intentions were far more sinister. One by one, I reached out to our guests, close friends and relatives who had witnessed Tate's neglect firsthand. Their outrage at his behavior only fueled our resolve, and they eagerly agreed to attend, eager to see justice served. As the preparations unfolded, a palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. Marlene and I worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail was perfect. The table was set with exquisite care, the meal meticulously planned, and the evidence, the damning footage and testimonies, carefully organized, ready to be unveiled at the opportune moment. Finally, the night of the dinner arrived, and our guests began to trickle in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled concern. They had no idea what was in store, but their trust in us was unwavering. As Tate strode through the door, fashionably late as always, a hush fell over the room. His eyes widened briefly at the sight of Marlene, vibrant and radiant, before his customary smirk slid into place. "Mother," he drawled, leaning in to plant a perfunctory kiss on her cheek, "you're looking well." Marlene's gaze was icy, her tone clipped. "Yes, thanks to Hallie's unwavering care and support." Tate's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, I stepped forward, my heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and righteous fury. "Shall we get started?" I gestured towards the dining table, my voice ringing with false cheer. As the meal progressed, the tension in the air was palpable. Tate regaled the guests with tales of his latest business exploits, oblivious to the scrutinizing glances darting his way. Marlene and I exchanged covert glances, our hands clasped tightly beneath the table, silently reassuring each other. Finally, as dessert was served, I cleared my throat, commanding the attention of everyone present. "Before we conclude our evening, there's something we'd like to share with you all." Tate's brow furrowed, but he remained silent, his curiosity piqued. With a slight nod from Marlene, I pressed play on the remote control, and the damning footage began to roll, bathing the room in an eerie glow. Tate's face contorted in horror as the evidence of his neglect played out for all to see, his mask of indifference shattered. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Marlene's voice, steady and resolute. "You've disappointed me for the last time, Tate." As the implications of her words sank in, Tate's veneer of composure crumbled, his true colors on full display, and in that moment I knew our retribution was complete. The deafening silence that followed Marlene's declaration was shattered by the scraping of Tate's chair as he abruptly stood, his face contorted in rage. "How dare you?" he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You're going to take the word of this woman over your own son?" Marlene's gaze remained steady, her expression unflinching. "The evidence speaks for itself, Tate. You've had countless opportunities to be there for me, but you chose your selfish ambitions instead." Tate's nostrils flared, and he rounded on me, his eyes blazing with accusation. "This is your doing, isn't it? You've been poisoning her against me from the start." Before I could respond, Marlene raised a hand, effectively silencing him. "Enough, Tate. Hallie has shown me more love and devotion than you ever have. She's the one who deserves my gratitude, not you." A murmur rippled through our guests, their expressions ranging from shock to righteous indignation. They had witnessed Tate's true colors, laid bare for all to see. Tate's gaze swept the room, his desperation palpable. "You can't all seriously believe this charade? She's manipulating you, can't you see?" But his pleas fell on deaf ears. One by one, our friends and relatives voiced their support for Marlene's decision, recounting their own experiences with Tate's neglect and indifference. As the onslaught of testimony continued, Tate's bravado crumbled, his mask of arrogance slipping away to reveal the pathetic, selfish man beneath. He slumped back into his chair, head in his hands, as the weight of his misdeeds bore down upon him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he raised his head, his eyes hollow and defeated. "Mother, please, give me another chance. I'll do better, I swear." But Marlene's resolve was unshakable. "It's too late for promises, Tate. You've made your choices, and now you must live with the consequences." With those words, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a document, sliding it across the table towards him. "These are the revised terms of my will. As of today, you have no claim to my assets or estate. Everything will be left to Hallie." Tate's eyes widened in disbelief as he scanned the pages, his face draining of color. You can't do this to me." But his protests were met with stony silence. Marlene had made her decision, and there was no turning back. As the evening drew to a close, our guests filtered out, offering words of support and congratulations. Tate remained slumped in his chair, a broken man, his world crumbling around him. Marlene approached me, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolution. "It's done, Hallie. He brought this upon himself," I nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did the right thing, Marlene. Now we can move forward, without his toxicity weighing us down." As we surveyed the aftermath of our reckoning, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Tate had been exposed for the selfish, heartless man he truly was, and he would never again be able to hurt or neglect those he claimed to love. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that was necessary for our healing to begin. In the days following our explosive confrontation, a tense silence descended upon the house. Tate had retreated into his study, emerging only for brief periods with a haunted look in his eyes. The reality of his actions had finally caught up to him, and the consequences were devastating. I expected him to lash out, to rage against the injustice of it all, but instead he seemed defeated, a mere shadow of the arrogant man he once was. It was almost pitiable, watching him grapple with the weight of his own selfish choices. Almost, but not quite. Marlene, on the other hand, carried herself with a newfound sense of purpose. The burden of Tate's neglect had been lifted, and she was determined to make the most of her second chance at life. "I want to sell the house," she announced one morning over breakfast, her voice steady and resolute. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Sell the house? But this is your home." She waved a dismissive hand. "It's too big for just the two of us, and it holds too many memories of." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. This place was tainted by Tate's indifference. "Of course," I murmured, reaching across the table to give her hand a gentle squeeze. "Whatever you want, Marlene. I'm with you every step of the way." Her eyes softened and she returned the gesture, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I know, dear, and I'm grateful for that." In the weeks that followed, I set about making preparations for the sale. Tate remained holed up in his study, emerging only to half-heartedly protest our decisions before retreating once more. "You can't just cut me out like this," he snarled one evening, his eyes wild with desperation. "Marlene, please reconsider. I'm your son." But Marlene was unmoved, her gaze steely and unwavering. "You made your choice a long time ago, Tate, and now you have to live with the consequences." His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I almost felt a twinge of pity for him. Almost. As the moving date approached, I caught glimpses of Tate making furtive phone calls, his brow furrowed in concentration. I knew he was grasping at straws, searching for any legal loophole that might allow him to contest Marlene's decisions. But his efforts were in vain. Unbeknownst to him, I had already taken steps to ensure that Marlene's wishes would be carried out to the letter. With the help of a trusted attorney, we had dotted every I and crossed every T, leaving no room for Tate's interference. The day we finally loaded the last of our belongings into the moving truck, I caught Tate watching from the window of his study, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something akin to regret cross his features. But it was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and there was no turning back. As we pulled away from the house, leaving Tate and the remnants of our former life behind, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new, a future where Marlene and I could forge our own path, unburdened by the toxic presence of her neglectful son. And as for Tate, well, he would have to learn to live with the consequences of his actions, just as we had lived with the pain of his indifference for far too long. The warm summer breeze caressed my face as I stepped out onto the balcony of our new apartment, a sense of peace washing over me. It had been 6 months since Marlene and I had left the old house behind, and the change had been transformative. "Hallie, dear, come take a look at this." Marlene's voice rang out from inside, filled with excitement. I hurried back into the living room, where she was beaming at me from her favorite armchair, a stack of glossy brochures in her lap. "What is it?" I asked, unable to contain my own smile at her infectious enthusiasm. "I've been researching art classes," she explained, patting the seat beside her in invitation. "There are so many wonderful options in the area, and I think it would be the perfect way for you to get back into teaching." My heart swelled with gratitude as I settled next to her, scanning the brochures with renewed interest. Teaching had been my passion before the chaos of recent years, and the prospect of returning to it filled me with a sense of purpose. "These look amazing. Marlene," I murmured, squeezing her hand affectionately. "Thank you for thinking of me." She waved away my thanks, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Nonsense, dear. You've done so much for me. It's the least I can do to support your dreams." As we pored over the class listings, chatting animatedly about the possibilities, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. The dark cloud of Tate's neglect had lifted, allowing us to bask in the warmth of our newfound freedom. In the months since our confrontation, I had barely heard from Tate. A part of me wondered if he had finally accepted the consequences of his actions, or if he was simply biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. But those thoughts were quickly pushed aside as Marlene's laughter filled the room, her energy and zest for life a constant reminder of the strength she possessed. "You know, Hallie," she mused, her expression turning contemplative, "I never would have had the courage to stand up to Tate if it weren't for you." I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up a hand, silencing me. "No, let me finish. You showed me what it truly means to care for someone, to put their needs above your own, and in doing so, you gave me the strength to take back control of my life." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I listened to her heartfelt words, overwhelmed by the depth of her gratitude. "Thank you, Marlene," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "for trusting me and for giving me the chance to be a part of your family." She reached out and cupped my cheek, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You are my family, Hallie, and together we've created something beautiful out of the ashes of Tate's selfishness." In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our bond forged through the fires of adversity and strengthened by our unwavering support for one another. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The path forward may not be easy, but with Marlene by my side, I knew we could weather any storm. And as for Tate, well, he had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences, alone, without the love and support of the family he had so callously discarded. It was a harsh lesson, but one that he had brought upon himself, and in the end, his loss was our gain. A chance to start anew, to build a life filled with love, laughter, and the unbreakable bond of chosen family. I should have known something was terribly wrong the moment Derek abruptly ended his phone call and shoved his cell into his pocket, his face taut with tension. My husband had been taking an abnormal number of private calls lately, always stepping away to murmur furtively like he had some big secret to hide. As he rejoined me on the living room couch, I studied his expression, trying to gauge his mood. "Everything okay, babe?" I ventured carefully. "You've seemed preoccupied lately." Derek avoided my gaze, letting out a strained chuckle. "It's nothing, Lena, just some dumb thing at work, that's all." His fingers tapped an agitated rhythm on the couch cushion as he forced a tight smile. "So what did you want to talk about?" Something in the pit of my stomach twisted sharply, warning me that he was hiding something serious. But I opted not to push further, at least not yet. "Well, I was hoping we could discuss our savings plan for the nursery remodel. Have you had a chance to look at the contractor quotes I emailed you?" His body stiffened, and those telltale worry lines creased his forehead. "About that," he began slowly. "I've been meaning to mention that I talked to my mom recently. She thinks we should hold off on the remodel for now." I blinked, struggling to comprehend. "What? Why would she say that?" A tendril of dread began unfurling in my chest. "She just thinks it's unwise to sink so much money into renovations with the way things are so uncertain right now," Derek said evasively. "The economy and all, you know? Maybe we should play it safe for a while." My pulse quickened as realization dawned. "Wait, does this have something to do with that big opportunity your mom wants you to invest in?" I demanded, unable to conceal the sharpness in my tone. "The one you two have been so secretive about." Derek frowned, suddenly looking dismayed, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Now, Lena, don't get worked up. It's just a little side business venture that could really pay off big in the long run." "That little venture is blowing through our life savings behind my back." I shot back, anger and betrayal roiling inside me, while I'm over here thinking we're on the same team, planning for our baby's future. Lurching to my feet, I paced in short, agitated bursts, my voice rising in incredulous disbelief. "I can't believe you'd let your mother manipulate you into gambling away everything we've worked for, all for some shady get-rich-quick scheme she's peddling." Derek stood as well, palms raised in a placating gesture as he took a step towards me. "Lena, calm down, okay? You're overreacting. Mom knows what she's doing. This investment is rock solid. Once we get the payoff, we'll be sitting pretty. No more money worries." I stared at the man I'd naively thought was my loving partner, unable to recognize him in that moment. How could I have been so blind to the truth slowly unraveling before my eyes? As if on cue, Derek's phone buzzed again with another incoming call, no doubt from his manipulative puppet master. The harsh reality slammed into me with sickening clarity. My husband's heart and loyalty no longer belonged to me. Not really. I was just another piece on the board, another player for Evelyn to control and subjugate through her web of lies and scheme. And I had a terrible feeling that her games were only just beginning. The weeks that followed were a waking nightmare. Evelyn's rock-solid investment predictably imploded in spectacular fashion, draining our life savings in what amounted to an elaborate financial shakedown. As Derek broke the devastating news, the fury etched in his expression made it clear where he placed the blame. "I can't believe you let this happen," he erupted, spit flying. "If you had just been supportive instead of fighting me every step, none of this would have gone south." I gaped at him, stunned by the venom and audacity of his misdirected rage. Before I could formulate a reply, the doorbell rang with the shrill, incessant ringing that could only be Evelyn. Derek threw up his hands and stormed off to let his mother in. The moment she swept into the living room in a floral moo-moo, her beady eyes lasered in on me with piercing accusation. "Well, I should have known," she tutted, shaking her head slowly. "We had a good thing going, and you just couldn't keep your doubts to yourself, could you?" Bewildered, I opened and closed my mouth, momentarily robbed of speech. I I never said anything to undermine. Oh, don't play dumb with me, Lena, Evelyn sneered, waddling closer until I could smell her stale cream puff breath. If you had been fully on board, lending your undivided support, my son's venture would have succeeded. Derek hovered behind his mother, nodding in sullen agreement. The sight of my own husband siding against me, drinking in his mother's toxic lies, was like a vice around my heart. I drew myself up as tall as I could manage, anger and defiance coursing through me. That's a loop and you know it, Evelyn. This had nothing to do with me. The feds were onto your shady scheme from the start. Evelyn's eyes flashed with undisguised malice. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might actually strike me before she caught herself. Everything has gone wrong because of you, she seethed, jabbing her pink sausage finger aggressively into my chest. I flinched at the vehemence of her tirade, my hand instinctively cradling my still flat abdomen, protecting the life growing inside me. Derek regarded my gesture with apparent disdain. Yeah, great going, Lena. Way to start our family off on the right track. Flat broke, all because you couldn't have a little faith in us. The cruelty and callousness of his words sliced deep. How had I fallen so far from the man I thought I knew? Trusted and loved, even? Before my tortured thoughts could run away from me, Evelyn's reedy cackle pierced the tension. Oh, don't worry, Derry, she cooed, patting his arm in a show of oily reassurance. This is just a temporary setback. We just need to rethink our strategy, that's all. Her flinty gaze settled on me again, glinting with an unmistakable malice. Whatever her twisted agenda entailed, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. I would never be free of Evelyn's manipulative venom. Not unless I fought back with every last ounce of and cunning I could muster. As much as the prospect sickened me, I realized that only one of us would emerge victorious from the grim battle looming ahead. For the sake of my unborn child's future, I had no choice but to ensure that victory would belong to me. In a desperate bid to salvage what remained of my fracturing marriage, I suggested Derek and I look into couples counseling. To my surprise, he didn't immediately balk at the idea. You know what, you might be onto something there, he said, tone uncharacteristically agreeable. This whole mess has been really hard on both of us. Maybe having an objective third party could help get our relationship back on track. I nodded, tentatively hopeful at his willingness. I think it's exactly what we need to work through this and move forward as partners. For the baby's sake. Derek's expression clouded briefly at the mention of the baby, that same flickering hesitation I'd noticed whenever our child came up. But he pasted on a reassuring smile. You're absolutely right. I'll make some calls. See about setting up our first session. True to his word, Derek booked our initial counseling appointment for the following week. But in the days leading up to it, his behavior shifted once more into that unsettling realm of secrecy and preoccupation. My suspicions escalated when he abruptly announced a last-minute business trip that would conveniently span our entire therapy window. You're just going to blow off counseling after I agreed to it? I challenged him, unable to hide my dismay. Derek, we can't keep avoiding our problems forever. That's what got us into this mess to begin with. He dismissed my protestations with an airy wave. Relax, it's just a little golf weekend with some potential clients, but you know what? You're right. Putting off counseling would be counterproductive. Why don't you come along? My brow furrowed with confusion. Come, along? To your business trip? Sure. Could be fun. Derek replied with a disarming chuckle. We can use the resort's couples services, have some nice relaxing spa time while we're there. Maybe fit in a massage or two after my meetings each day. The jovial pitch put me immediately on guard. Derek acted entirely too eager, too polished in his sales patter. Like he was reciting from a carefully rehearsed script rather than being genuinely spontaneous. Against my better judgment, I hesitantly agreed to accompany him. Looking back, that singular lapse in discernment would ultimately serve as the tipping point that sent my life into irreversible freefall. The seaside resort we checked into appeared pleasant enough on its manicured surface. White sandy beaches, poolside cabanas, luxury spa amenities. But I couldn't shake an ominous pall lurking just beneath that postcard-ready facade. Those unshakable misgivings cemented into sheer dread when we made our way to the private bungalows where Derek claimed his meetings would be held. because looming among the quaint cottages, her floral muumuu and pinched glower, unmistakable even from a distance, was the last person on earth I wanted to see right then. My scheming, conniving mother-in-law. And in that soul-withering moment when Derek's eyes met Evelyn's with a subtle, knowing nod, I realized too late that I had been lured into her latest trap, one from which there might be no escape. The hot, salty breeze stung my eyes as Derek and I approached the cluster of bungalows where Evelyn waited, her arms folded tightly in dissatisfied judgment. Several other figures milled about, solemn-faced men and women I didn't recognize. "What is this?" I hissed at Derek through a tight smile, desperately hoping this was all some misguided surprise he had planned. "Who are these people?" Before he could respond, Evelyn stepped forward, her expression a chilling mask of smug resolve. "Good, you're here," she said flatly. "We've been expecting you, Lena. It's time we had a long overdue reckoning." The words were ominous, layered with threatening undercurrents. My chest tightened as dread took hold. "Mother, maybe we should have some privacy to talk," Derek stammered, suddenly looking less certain than when we'd arrived. But Evelyn shushed him with a curt wave of her hand. "There will be no more talking in circles. We're done with niceties. It's time for the truth to finally come out, for Lena's own good." One of the other women, a stern-looking blonde in a pantsuit, cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should move this inside, where it will be contained." My heart pounded furiously as I was ushered into the nearest bungalow, sensing I had no choice but to cooperate, at least for now. The others filed in silently and arrayed themselves in a semicircle of hard-backed chairs facing a weathered love seat where I was instructed to sit. Evelyn assumed a position at the head of the makeshift assembly, her cold stare locking onto me. "You've been a source of negativity and strife from the moment you came into this family, Lena, poisoning my son's mind with your doubts and ingratitude time and again. It's why we currently find ourselves in such profound difficulties." The words seemed ludicrous, laughable in their sheer audacity, and yet they were delivered with such biting certainty that my rebuke withered on my lips. "Our objective today is to remedy that toxic influence through truth and accountability," Evelyn pressed on, undeterred. "We will persist until you acknowledge and confess your failings as a wife and soon-to-be mother. Only then can you atone and be reintegrated on the path of righteousness." The room blurred around me as the full, horrific realization crystallized. This wasn't merely some twisted reckoning in Evelyn's mind. It was a systematic attempt to break me, to strip away my identity and remake me in her own warped image. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. "You're the one who has poisoned this family." I spat out, struggling to keep my voice from shaking with rage and desperation. "With your lies and schemes, using Derek as your puppet to control me." "Lies?" Evelyn's eyes flashed with indignation. "The only lies here are the ones you've allowed into this family through your selfish resistance." In an instant, the others were on their feet, hurling their own accusations in a dizzying torrent of verbal lashings. I cringed back into the love seat as their voices rose in fervor, drowning me in wave after wave of recrimination and scorn. Somewhere in the chaos, Derek watched impassively, making no move to intercede or calm the escalating ambush, like a damning harbinger of where his true allegiances would forever lie, with his mother, no matter how depraved her manipulations. As the onslaught reached its fevered peak, something inside me fractured. I finally understood that there would be no victory for me here today, no matter how righteous my defiance. Not against these overwhelming forces arrayed to systematically deconstruct my sense of self. The only way to escape from this nightmare was to play along, to acquiesce in hopes of surviving long enough to strike back later when I held the advantage. To live to fight another day, as much as that singular thought lacerated my very soul, even if that day might never come. I have no idea how long the harrowing intervention lasted. Time seemed to blur and distort as hours of psychological torment blended together. All I knew was that by the end, I was left utterly depleted, slumped in the love seat while flecks of spittle dried on my skin. Evelyn sneered victoriously as she proclaimed the session concluded. "Get some rest, Lena. We'll reconvene in the morning to accept your full confession." Still shaking, I watched through hollow eyes as her cabal of cohorts filed out. Only Derek remained behind, not quite meeting my gaze. I should have stopped them, he mumbled, sounding more like a sullen teenager than a grown man. But you have to admit, you brought a lot of this on yourself, antagonizing Mom at every turn. The words lanced through what little remained of my tattered self-worth. I wanted to lash out, to rage and scream at this pitiful excuse for a man, but the futility of it rendered me mute. Without another word, Derek turned and left me alone in the dimly lit bungalow, shutting the door with a dull thud of finality. The desolate quiet that followed was somehow more oppressive than the torrent of verbal assaults I'd just endured. I'm not sure how long I remained there in that emaciated husk of a state, dwelling in my despair. But at some point, a faint inner voice sparked to life, almost inaudible at first. You cannot give up now, not when so much is at stake. The thought crystallized like a revelation, focusing my fracturing psyche. Because Derek and his wretched mother were right about one thing. They had underestimated me. Seen me as weak, as a broken spirit ready to surrender completely. But in that moment, I tapped into a reserve of strength from somewhere deep inside. The part of me that drew from a primal well, a maternal drive to safeguard the innocent life gestating within me. My child's life. Almost mechanically, I rose from the love seat and surveyed my surroundings with new alertness. A sliver of pre-dawn light filtered through the bungalow's bay window, illuminating the outline of a heavy wooden chair propped beneath the latch. A security measure, no doubt to keep me contained. Inching towards the chair, I hefted its solid weight experimentally before hoisting it up and slamming it squarely into the window. The glass fractured in a satisfying spray of shards. I bashed at it again and again, undeterred even as my knuckles grew slick with blood. Sharpened determination propelled me until I had created an opening wide enough to slip through. The cool caress of morning beach air danced across my clammy skin as I hauled myself over the sill and dropped gracelessly onto the sand below, wincing at the bite of stray shards. My escape was far from assured, but sheer adrenaline fortified my battered body with a potent second wind. I sprinted away from the bungalow as fast as my legs could carry me, following the faint illumination of the rising sun towards the unknown. Freedom was still just a fragile hope glimmering on the horizon, but it was a future I would fight like hell to claim, one painstaking step after another, no matter how daunting the odyssey ahead might be. For the sake of my child, merely surviving was no longer an option. I would find a way to fight back and win. The days and weeks after my harrowing escape from that nightmare resort passed in a blur. Staying one step ahead of Derek and Evelyn's efforts to track me down consumed every waking moment. I couldn't risk going to the authorities, not yet. With their wealth and influence, they would surely turn it into a vicious custody battle that I might not win in my current delicate condition. No, I needed to play this smarter, gather insurmountable evidence of their depravity first. My parents took me in without question, offering shelter and lending what financial support they could. It shamed me to put them at risk by involving them at all, but I was out of options. During those tense months, I meticulously compiled documentation of every step of Derek and Evelyn's duplicitous campaign against me. Financials, witness testimony, surveillance photos, anything and everything that could be leveraged. There was no margin for error. My case would need to be irrefutable. When my baby bump finally became unmistakable, Derek made his first attempt at contact since abandoning me at the resort. The message was lengthy, saccharine-laced with feigned contrition and platitudes about putting our difficulties behind us. But the underlying message was unmistakable. He and Evelyn were growing desperate to regain control. I was tempted, for a fleeting moment, to respond with a blistering rebuke and lay my cards on the table. But that would merely sacrifice my advantage while accomplishing nothing. So I remained silent and kept building my case. As expected, their efforts escalated from there. Evelyn's flying monkeys sniffed around my parents' home a few times until I was forced to relocate again. I caught strangers furtively trying to snap pictures of me on the street, no doubt seeking ammunition to support claims of my unfitness. The final straw came when a bulky man shoved an expired court summons into my hands outside the Obgyn clinic following a checkup. The paper was meaningless, a fabricated ruse to rattle me, but it revealed just how far they were willing to go. If I didn't strike first, there was no limit to the damage they'd try to inflict when the baby arrived, which is why I swallowed my trepidation and sought out the best family law firm in the state. Sitting across from that cool-eyed senior partner, I finally laid out the entire sordid truth for the first time, holding nothing back. To their credit, the attorneys mastered their revulsion at the more horrific details, absorbing it all with clinical detachment. But I could see the calculated gears turning as they recognized the unbridled legal firestorm this case could unleash. Less than 48 hours later, Evelyn and Derek were slapped with a temporary restraining order and barrage of subpoenas, clawing back years of financial data, communications, and records pertaining to their corrosive scheme. The element of surprise was complete. They never saw it coming. When Derek frantically called to plead his case, I savored every syllable of his desperate, impotent blubbering. I imagined his mother going into conniptions, her deranged sense of entitlement crumbling. And in that moment I pitied them both in a way. Evelyn's scorched-earth parenting, her vitriolic need to control those around her, had ultimately transformed her into precisely the monster unleashed upon me. And Derek's Faustian bargain had shackled him to that all-consuming toxicity. But pity is a grace they never once afforded me. The coming year would see my own hardships escalate in ways I could scarcely fathom. A new mother fighting tooth and nail, both as a protective parent and an impassioned legal combatant. But thanks to my resolve and strategic groundwork, I held the high ground. It was only a matter of time before karma inserted the final pieces to bring Derek and Evelyn's depraved ambition to its kneecap, and I would be lying if I said I didn't plan to savor every last minute. The months following my preemptive legal strike were a grinding gauntlet of litigation and personal attacks. Derek and Evelyn responded to my bombshell lawsuit with a vengeance, churning out lies and false allegations rapid fire. Fortunately, my own airtight documentation blunted the worst of their smear campaign. Still, having to counter increasingly outlandish claims about everything from faking my pregnancy to suffering from mental instability took a grueling toll. I was utterly drained by the time I finally gave birth to my son, Liam. That first moment, cradling his squirming little form, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face, remains the purest memory from that entire nightmare, uncorrupted by the toxicity swirling around us. For a few fleeting days, I allowed myself to soak in the splendor of new motherhood, letting the lingering stresses recede into the background. I knew the reprieve was temporary, but I selfishly safeguarded those moments as long as I could. The bubble burst when I was served with Derek's motion for emergency custody. The paperwork read like Evelyn's manifesto regurgitated in legalese, complete with florid claims that I had effectively kidnapped Liam and posed a danger to him unless he was immediately removed from my care. My own attorneys assured me the motion was little more than a delayed intimidation tactic aimed at sabotaging my case momentum. Still, I couldn't shake the bone-deep fear of having my infant son wrested from my arms. My dread only escalated when our first courtroom showdown landed me face-to-face with Derek and Evelyn once again. Their snarling contempt hit me like a physical force as the vitriol began spewing. "This pathetic fantasy has gone on quite long enough," Evelyn proclaimed with a dismissive sneer. "We tried putting you on the path to redemption, but you insist on resisting to the detriment of my grandson. This is no life for a child." I fought to keep my breathing steady, struggling against the instinct to lash out. My attorneys had prepped me extensively on not rising to their verbal baits. Derek took the baton, his glowering expression more hangdog than threatening. "Just let us bring Liam home where he belongs, Lena, with people who actually care about giving him a stable life. Not whatever this is." He made a vague, disparaging gesture which caused Evelyn to tut loudly in disgust. The well-choreographed good cop, bad cop routine was so transparent, so patently patronizing after all we had endured. "Do you ever stop to hear the deranged vitriol dribbling from your own mouths?" I said at last, adrenaline emboldening me. "We both know this has never truly been about Liam's well-being. It's about controlling anything and everything around you until it bends to your twisted demands." Evelyn started, her mouth working furiously as she prepared to unleash another volley of abuse. But the judge's stern gavel cut her off with an irritated clap. "Mrs. Bowen, that's more than enough," His Honor intoned firmly. "No further outbursts or I'll have the bailiffs remove you." Fuming, Evelyn subsided into seething silence. Derek appeared to shrink slightly, chastened by his failed ploy. For perhaps the first time in his life, he seemed to register just how frail their position had become. It was the first small but unmistakable shift in momentum, the start of their unraveling before an increasingly skeptical legal system. I left that day's proceedings holding Liam a little tighter, bolstered by the knowledge that their persecution was cracking at long last. There would undoubtedly be more horrors to come before the final rulings. But like an offshore storm finally breaking, I sensed their dark era of control over our lives had finally reached its apex. Soon, everything they'd sown through deceit and malice would begin reaping its most profound consequence. And this time, there would be no more mercy from me, not after the depravities they'd inflicted on me and my child. This time, they would answer for it all and know true karma. The culmination finally arrived nearly a year to the day after my desperate escape from that nightmare resort getaway Evelyn had orchestrated. All the discovery maneuvering, pre-trial posturing, and failed sideshow motions led to this. A final, protracted court battle that would decide the fates of everyone involved. Derek and Evelyn's smugness had steadily eroded with each rebuffed attempt to regain leverage, but their defiance remained obstinate. I had to hand it to them. They played their losing hand with a zeal that bordered on delusional. When we entered the courthouse on that crisp October morning, Evelyn turned to sneer at me with her customary disdain. "Enjoy this circus while it lasts, you ungrateful shrew. Soon, the decent, stable world I've fought to preserve for my grandson will be restored." I said nothing, unwilling to justify her provocation with a response. My sole focus was getting Liam situated with the court-appointed guardian who would be supervising him throughout the grueling proceedings. The trial itself was every bit as drawn-out and emotionally grueling as expected. Evelyn's legal team launched salvo after salvo of character attacks, revisiting every perceived maternal shortcoming in grandiose detail. I sat stoically through it all, following my own attorney's impeccable guidance. I knew their scattershot smears wouldn't connect with the jurors, not with the overwhelming documentation and testimony we had marshaled. When it was finally time for me to take the stand, there was an unmistakable sense of shift in the courtroom atmosphere. 12 pairs of eyes followed my every measured movement, all preliminary biases and assumptions giving way to rapt attention. From there, I simply talked. Spoke plainly and honestly about the nightmare I'd endured at the hands of Derek and his venomous mother. I recounted the lies and manipulations in granular detail, leaving nothing out, no matter how unsavory. Evelyn thrashed indignantly at times until the judge threatened her with contempt. Derek sat motionless, eyes downcast, vaguely reminiscent of those first fitful moments when his self-delusions began cracking. I don't know how long I held the jury enthralled, but by the time I was let off the stand, there could be no ambiguity about the profound impact my testimony had made. Several jurors wore expressions of dismay and disbelief. They had witnessed evil firsthand. Derek and Evelyn's subsequent attempts to redeem their case took on a rote hollowness after that. Neither mustered any believable passion for their fabricated narratives, as if some deep part of them had finally acknowledged their descent into self-parody. The final blow landed when forensic accountants took the stand and meticulously detailed the RICO-laden financial fraud underpinning Evelyn's ill-fated business. Investment, my family's hard-earned life savings ruthlessly squandered. After that, the jury's deliberations were little more than a formality. In the end, I was awarded full custody of Liam as well as a substantial multi-million-dollar judgment against Evelyn and her syndicate of grifters. Derek's reputation and future career prospects were summarily annihilated. It was a complete legal massacre on a scale of humiliation even I had not foreseen. While I relished the delicious karmic karma of the moment, there was no sense of elation or relief when the verdicts came down. My gaze lingered on Derek as his pallid, haggard expression registered the devastating finality of it all. A grown man rendered infantile and broken on the altar of one woman's monstrous obsession with control. I thought maybe a shred of remorse might flicker across his face, some profound regret for having sacrificed everything to his mother's malignant influences. But his stare remained blank and empty, 2 decades of brainwashing too entrenched to ever overcome. "Have your victory, then, you spiteful witch," Evelyn hissed vehemently at me, mercifully concluding her reign of terror with one last sputtering outburst as the bailiffs led her away. "We'll see how long your house of lies stands when the truth about you inevitably surfaces." As the courtroom finally cleared out, I pulled Liam close and pressed my lips to the crown of his downy head. Looking into those innocent, adoring eyes, I knew I had emerged victorious. But it was a victory wrought from desperation and hardship, a rite of fire that had steeled me with an alloy resilience. No further vindictiveness or bitterness remained, only a bone-deep resolve to shepherd my son's life towards promise, at long last unshackled from Evelyn's corrosive reach. The ordeal had remade me, uncompromised and finely honed, to ensure Liam's future would be one of compassion and selfless purpose, and that would be the realest, most enduring justice of all.